We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Hey guys! Here is part 5 of What If Naruto Became a Jonin Sensei. He was left broken from the death of his parents. The one man who had salvaged the pieces burned to ashes in front of his eyes. At times, he questioned the meaning of life. But who knows? Maybe these 3 little genin might show him the answer. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 9, The Root of All Fears 2. Fu Yamanaka was considered to be the best that Root had to offer. His mission record was that of utter perfection, never having failed a task and accepting even the most difficult of orders with unwavering loyalty and obedience. He was considered Danzo's most powerful tool. The very instrument of his will, more skilled in nature than his insect-wielding Aburame partner. There wasn't a single shinobi in Root that could match his prowess. Danzo had even openly stated to him that if he should die, the leadership of the Foundation would rest on his shoulders, having already been handpicked as his one true successor. And Danzo made his choice wisely. Fu was a natural leader. His right-hand man that was armed with the responsibility of his very own protection. Fu could almost be considered the perfect son that he would never have. Fu took all of this in with humble respect and only responded with serving his master all the more fiercely. That's why he felt confident when he accepted his dangerous task of tailing one Namikaze Naruto, the Yellow Fang of Konoha. Listed as an S-class in every bingo book on the continent. Skills so dangerous Iwagakure had given him an avoid-at-all-cost warning. There was only one other shinobi that had struck such fear in IWA. As the saying goes, like father, like son. Fu ignored all that, favoring to classify Naruto as just another mission. His mission was his life. He never failed, so that's why he favored to follow him in broad daylight where his presence would be least expected. His sister had informed him that the man tended to lower his guard whenever he was in the village. He would be easy prey, like a mouse ignorant to the hawk that circled high above. But his sister had made a grave miscalculation. After years of service and experience, one didn't reach the level Naruto was at by relaxing whenever they reached the safety of a village. Many would call it paranoia, but those having achieved the rank of S-class would call it instinct. Always remain vigilant. Fu would never have guessed that he would be utterly reduced to nothing, knocked around like a play toy. The man toyed with him, seeing his worth, before knocking him so hard he felt his spine rattle. Never in his life had he felt so outclassed. He knew he was fighting a losing battle and just tried to end it all by falling into that infinite void, but even then, the man was just too fast. He was finished. Plain and simple. He knew his fate was sealed as his mind was ripped open and had his thoughts dissected like in science experiment. His skills that he had trained years to develop and master, a body worked tirelessly till it was numb to pain, and a mind so deeply guarded that not even his consciousness had a voice, was all worthless. Utterly and despicably worthless. Fu had already lost his sense of speech by the second day and his fine motor skills all but dulled, leaving him with nothing to do other than groan as Naruto continued his mental dissection, ruthlessly cutting through his mind like a scalpel. He felt his body going numb, indicating soon that he would lose all feeling. Naruto blinked, cutting off the mental torture, and Fu's head dropped lifelessly to the side. His mouth was wide open, a river of drool endlessly pouring out, and his bloodshot eyes were wide open. They hadn't blinked since he had started his genjutsu. That was 72 hours ago. Naruto nearly collapsed as he felt the last of his reserves dip. He was breathing hard and his eye was twitching badly. Genjutsu was seriously not his forte. Despite his tired form, inside his mind was racing a mile a minute. A raw, burning anger fueled him to just kill the mentally scared man right where he was. But he relented. He would piece his mind back together, then force the man to watch as that horse suffered the same fate. Only he would take his time with her. She was Root, right? He wanted to see if she was more resilient to pain than her brother. He sighed deeply and tried to calm his racing heart. His limbs felt like they weighed a ton, and he was forcing himself to try and not dispel. What had felt like 3 days in this room was in reality really a second in the real world. It had taken its toll on him, but it was worth it in the end. He had learned all he needed to know. Oh, he had learned all about what Danzo was planning and how Riha was the key he needed, or should he say surrogate he needed to get his hands on his genes. Fu was Danzo's right hand, his so-called best of the best. His status had entitled him to some of the man's darkest secrets. Secrets that were all revealed to his eyes and played like a projector in a cinema. The stunning realization of it all had made his body go numb at first. He was heartbroken. Confused. Hurt. Betrayed. But most of all he felt stupid. Stupid enough to allow for something like this to happen to him of all people. He had to hand it to the man for using a woman, a seductress, to get him to lower the carefully guarded barriers he had maintained for years and play him like a violin while slowly, ever so slowly cutting the strings. She had been playing him from the start, tying him to a leash and leading him along like a dog going for a walk. Everything that he had shared with her was reported to her brother, who then reported straight to Danzo. Everything from their intimate moments, his lifestyle, his jutsu, his friends, his deceased family, his genin, even his conversations. Everything was reported. Both Fu and Riha would communicate telepathically from the seals connected to their tongues, one that was painstakingly hidden on her so not even his Sharingan would detect it. The man had taken to remove her first seal, which by Fu's memories was torturous enough, and then painfully extended her tongue to its unnatural full length and place another seal on her where he would never see it. It had only showed him the great lengths Danzo took to make sure his personally whore was secured tight. He deduced her new title fit her nicely as he wasn't the first of her many targets. Fu's mind had showed him that she had been all over the place. Kyumo, Kiri, Suna, even Iwa fell slave to her charms. The thought of it all left him empty inside. Then he felt a burn. Like a flickering flame slowly growing in strength. The burning sensation was coming from the back of his head. More specifically, it felt like the left side of his brain was on fire. His Sharingan burned to the point it became uncomfortable and he was forced to cover it as the marginal drain that he usually didn't even notice, even when he was exhausted, now began to drain at an alarming rate. He lowered his shaky arm from his headband and gazed on quietly in stony silence. He was about to disperse. But he wanted the original to be present. His skill in spacetime ninjutsu was subpar at the moment, but he had been studying whenever he had time and his efforts had been rewarded as he gotten the Thunder God Jutsu just shy the level of its original creator. Using it like his father was out of the question. Holding up the ram sign, he focused his chakra to the Thunder God marker on his back, the same one that his father had placed on him as a child, and sent the last of his chakra through it, sending a signal through space and time to contact his original. Naruto couldn't be prouder of Team 7. Each one of them had come a long way from the first day they had all met in that classroom. As he dodged Sakura's lethal strikes, redirected Sasuke's fire with some wind, and parried Konohamaru's blows, he internally smiled despite them trying to kill him in another one of their training sessions. He had thought that the SD test would tarnish their young minds and make them reject the true harshness of shinobi life. He would never have expected them to bounce back so quickly, taking the reality of it all like true solders. It was relieving. Even seasoned Chunin took weeks to recover, but their young minds only took a night's rest. Maybe he had underestimated their minds, but he would never again take them for granted and say there wasn't anything they couldn't handle. Mostly, kick his ass guys. He ignored Riha's shout of encouragement as he blocked off their furious Taijusta combination. They were getting better. He could no longer just easily walk over them like he used to. Now he had to actually put in a bit of effort to knock them into unconsciousness. But only a little. Sasuke had his Sharingan blazing as he palmed two kunai and tried to cut him to pieces. Ever since he had completed his dojutsu, his strikes had become more precise and movements more fluid. His eyes could predict movements, not allowing for Naruto to dance around him like the old days. Konohamaru was a different story. The boy was fierce. He knew of the Sarutobi talent, but this little monkey was trying to bash his face in. And Sakura, his sweet, innocent little Pinky-chan that used to hate even getting sweat on her form, now had the most vicious scowl he had ever seen on the girl as she kept up with both boys, trying to land a glowing fist on his form. He carefully kept out of her reach. He would say that she had improved the most out of the entire team. She was no longer the weak link that seemed to weigh down her two teammates. She now stood shoulder to shoulder, a proud kunoichi that earned her place as soldier. She had long since taken her shinobi life seriously ever since their conversation during the bell test. After one of their training sessions in the past, she had come to him to personally for one-on-one training to try and get her up to her teammates' levels. At first he was hesitant, knowing that personal training for her would be extremely demanding if she wanted to keep up with her two teammates. But that look of determination and will manifested itself, something the boys had teasingly dubbed to her ire, inner Sakura, showing him she was ready for whatever he threw her way. Was he ever in for a surprise? During what Sakura would dub torture, he would mercilessly knock her around till the point she passed out or his knuckles hurt from impacting against her forehead. As many times he would knock her down, she would just get straight back up. He had to hand to the girl, she sure knew how to take a punch. Sometimes he wouldn't touch her and just playfully keep out of her to the point she would get frustrated that she could never even touch him. And then that inner persona would manifest itself and she would become angry. Really angry. So angry to the point she would give a cry of righteous female fury and charge him like a reckless bull. Of course he would thrash her into the ground at being so reckless and lecture her over losing her composure. A shinobi should never lose composure. But one day, when the inner persona blazed, he teased her about how he took a shit the same color as her hair. She managed to land a glancing blow. Now, normally he could swat away her punches like harmless flies, but decided to give her a free shot. He didn't expect to double over and be sent flying. Her punch hurt. A lot. He had to reveal his Sharingan to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. Yes, sweet little Pinky-chan had sent him flying with a nasty right hook to the stomach. Naruto couldn't believe it at first. Heck, he was sure if he told the boys they would either laugh at him for telling a good joke or try and get him to sign into the nearest mental institution. But his Sharingan entitled him to see what others could not. Every time her fist would impact against his body, she would unconsciously build up and release her chakra with every strike she landed. In all his life he had only seen such a form of chakra control in one other woman. And at the time, she was trying to punch his head off as he ran for dear life with her prized necklace. His disbelief was confirmed as he instructed her to punch a large boulder the exact same way she had struck him. The boulder had shattered under her blow. He had almost started hyperventilating at the realization of it all and nearly crushed the girl to death from hugging her. Just to brag, he had halted training that day and transported her to Team Guy's training ground, where the Green Beast was training his young clone for a private lesson. How he loved that boy like a son. Sakura was confused. 1 second Naruto was hugging her, next he was talking to a man dressed in a green leotard with the largest eyebrows she had ever seen. And to make things even more awkward was the smaller clone of the man that had introduced himself as Rock Lee and pestered her to be his girlfriend. She had refused, trying to catch the whispered words of their senseis. She saw Naruto throw his hands wide in the air gesturing to her before he smashed a fist into his open palm, and green-wearing man's mouth dropped open. Naruto nodded fervently, mimicking the boulder that she had broken apart with a shudder, and the man's thick eyebrows reached his hairline before he started shouting words about youth. Before she could blink he was standing before her introducing himself. He had only managed to say his name before Naruto blocked his view, mouthing words of "she's mine," and Guy-sensei started crying, saying it wasn't fair. Naruto remained unmoved, only responding with words that confused her to no end. "I'm sorry, Guy. But I will be the only one to light her flames of youth." What a strange day that had been. But she never regretted a moment of it, since Naruto had increased her training, focusing on taijutsu that became her strong feat. He had explained to her that she was unknowingly using the beginning stages of a certain Sanin's monstrous strength. To complement her style, he taught her a modified version of the rough fist style that focused on key elements to the technique while retaining grace. Naruto grinned as he remembered it all, glancing at Sakura as she tried to land one of her punches. "Gah! Just stay still, sensei. I promise I won't hurt you too bad." Naruto smiled as danced around her. "Ah, look boys, Pinky-chan is upset," he mocked. The boys didn't react to his words, only continuing their relentless assault, their scowls matching Sakura's as they had yet to even touch him. Curse him and his speed. Beside Sakura, a red-eyed Konohamaru blitzed forward, trying to surprise him in burst of speed, but was always knocked back. He had taken to use the Kyuubi chakra around them after their team meeting. "Yo!" Sasuke rolled his eyes as he leaned against the stump behind him. Despite his expression, he couldn't hide his grin. "You're both late." Beside him, Sakura hopped off the tree stump she was resting on, grinning at the sight of the duo. "Hello Naruto-sensei, Konohamaru-kun." Her eyes lit shined at the sight of the female behind the pair. "Riha-san." The female smiled at the young girl. "Hello my dear." When blue eyes turned to him, Sasuke blushed. "Hi Sasuke-kun." He nodded at her, holding up a hand in a wordless greeting. Naruto smiled as Konohamaru ran up to the two and bumped knuckles with Sasuke and accepted a hug from Sakura. Konohamaru tilted his head at the girl before gesturing to her hair. "You cut your hair?" Indeed, the once long hair that had reached her back was now mid-length, only scraping past her neck. She had accentuated it by putting it into a ponytail. Even adjustments were made to her clothes. She was still wearing her familiar pink dress, only no, it was shorter, resembling a skirt held together at the sides with some straps. Sakura rubbed her hair nervously. It looks okay, right? It was getting in the way when she trained and was becoming too much of a hassle. She had long since taken her shinobi life more seriously ever since Naruto's words during the test and decided it was time for some changes. And it showed. She was faster, stronger and more overall meeting the standards of an acceptable kunoichi. Konohamaru grinned. Hell yeah, it looks really good. She smiled sweetly at him before she turned to Sasuke. Feeling two pair of eyes on him, Sasuke grunted before a small smile formed on his face. It's nice. Konohamaru just grinned stupidly and Sasuke narrowed his eyes. What? He demanded. Nothing. Konohamaru replied teasingly. It's just that Mr. Big Bad Uchiha has lost his touch. Sasuke's eyes narrowed to slits. You calling me soft? He whispered dangerously. Konohamaru's grin became so wide his eyes closed. As a marshmallow, the Uchiha snarled and speared Konohamaru to the ground. Both boys began to roll across the training field hailing insults all the while biting and scratching. Sakura growled at their forms. Why do the both of you always have to act like idiots? Don't you see you're embarrassing Sensei? Both boys topped, glancing at each other, then at Sakura and back again before they nodded. Before Sakura could react, she was tackled and a three-way battle ensued as they all began to fight. Naruto sighed painfully, glancing up at the sky. Beside him Riha giggled watching as Sakura smashed both boys' head together. Oh my, what a rowdy bunch they are. He didn't reply, only extending his hand and letting a golden chain slither out and save the boys from their losing battle. Sakura could actually hurt the two if he didn't intervene. When they were all restrained, he slowly walked closer to stand in front of them. Can we save the fighting for later? He trailed off, seeing both boys tremble as Sakura ran her thumb slowly across her neck and pointed at the two of them. Sakura. She removed her glare and smiled sweetly up at him. Naruto shook his head. Right. As I was saying, can you all save the fighting for later? I want to talk to everyone about the test. He knew that they all probably talked to the grief counselors that were present, but he wanted to hear from each of them personally. Seeing their nods, he retracted his chain before sitting down in front of them, Riha taking her time to sit beside him. He turned his eyes to Sasuke. How are you feeling? Sasuke shrugged, avoiding his gaze. Okay, I guess. I didn't really get much sleep that night. Naruto nodded, expecting that type of answer. Did you feel regretful? Or maybe sad that you had to take an innocent life? Sasuke met his gaze. I couldn't fail. Failure would mean I'd never be able to see you guys again. I did what I had to do, right? Naruto stared at him before he nodded. Yeah, you did. He turned his eyes to Sakura, smiling inwardly when she didn't shy away from his gaze. What about you, Sakura? She fisted her hands into her dress. I couldn't really eat anything last night without trying not to puke. She bit her lip. I didn't get much sleep either. Not that it mattered anyway. It felt strange at first, but then after a while it settles. It's like my body and mind are used to it. She finished with a whisper. Naruto nodded at her before he turned to Konohamaru. We already talked, but do you want to tell them what we discussed before we got here? The genin nodded slowly before he faced his two teammates. I have something to tell you guys. Seeing their curious gazes, he took a deep breath. It was now or never. I am the jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. Silence. Naruto stared at the two and took in their reactions. Sasuke curiously just seemed content, smirking as if he already knew such a secret. Sakura meanwhile had her brow scrunched up in confusion before her eyes widened. Jerk. She thumped Sasuke on the head. That's what you meant when you said jinchuriki. Naruto raised a brow and Konohamaru gawked. Riha tried not to giggle as Sasuke rubbed his head, glaring at her. It's not my fault you were an oblivious moron. For the so-called smartest kunoichi you're pretty slow. I mean, come on, how obvious was it when, damn it, stop hitting me, Sakura. Sasuke tried to block her hands, but she managed to pin him and wrap her fingers around his throat. Ack! Her attempt at strangling was halted by a throat clear. So both of you already know. Konohamaru's confusion was evident in his voice as he stared at the two of them dumbly. Sakura nodded, ignoring the way Sasuke was prying at her hands. Well, I didn't know, but I guess Sasuke-kun already did. Remember the day of our test? He nodded. Well, right after you stormed off, Duck Butt here asked me if I knew you were a jinchuriki. I kind of slowly figured it out after that. She smiled at Sweet Him before she frowned. Is that why you acted so arrogant? Were you in the academy? To hide your status? Konohamaru slowly nodded. Yeah, I was ordered to take up a fake persona, he trailed off pointing to Sasuke. Ah, Sakura-chan. Seeing his finger, she glanced down at Sasuke and hastily let go of his neck, seeing his face turning blue. Sasuke immediately began to heave, greedily sucking in the much-needed oxygen. Sakura got off of him, allowing him to sit up as he placed a hand over his chest, trying to calm his racing heart. His murderous gaze turned to her. Bitch! Were you trying to kill me? Sakura smiled sweetly before she roughly grabbed his hair, ignoring his cry of pain. What was that, Sasuke-kun? You love your Sakura-chan. Aw fuck, why? She pinched his cheek till he cried out. Now Duck Butt-kun, don't be rude. She shoved him hard enough to make his back hit the ground. When green eyes turned to him, Konohamaru failed to hide his flinch. You were saying Konohamaru-kun. Alright. I was ordered to take up a fake persona, so that's the reason why I acted like that. The idiot you knew through the academy isn't the real me. Sasuke sat up, brushing himself off, briefly glaring at Sakura before he focused his attention on the genin. So what's the real you? Konohamaru sighed painfully before his eyes grew distant. A weapon. He elaborated, seeing their confusion. After the Kyuubi attack, Konoha was weakened. Other countries were monitoring the leaf, and there was almost a cold war between Mangekyo. So they decided that I was to become that weapon. The ace that Konoha needed. He fisted his hands on his pants tightly. When I turned 7, I was taken from my home and put into a training facility. From there I was subjected to 2 years of intense physical and mental training to condition my body. When I turned 9, my real test began. Sasuke narrowed his eyes. To control the beast inside of you? Beside him, Sakura gasped in shock. Konohamaru nodded grimly before he continued. Yeah, they wanted for me to gain control of the Kyuubi's chakra. But for some reason my body couldn't handle the corrosive chakra, and I suffered a great deal of pain when I used it. For the first time in my life, I failed. He slowly lifted his shirt, revealing his navel. He focused his chakra and seal appeared before their eyes. This is the 8 trigrams seal. Both Sakura and Sasuke leaned forward to get a better look, and even Naruto looked on in interest. Consisting of 2 4-symbol seals joined together circling around a spiral, the 8 trigram seal stood as a pinnacle of genius. Naruto had to marvel at his utterly perfect design and briefly exposed his Sharingan to see the many lines flowing with chakra. Behind it, a veil of burning red was slowly mixing with Konohamaru's own chakra network. Wow! It looks so beautiful. She stretched her hand forward and traced the design lightly. To think this contains something like the Kyuubi. Konohamaru laughed nervously as his cheeks burned. Ah, Sakura-chan, that tickles. She retracted her hand, smiling sheepishly. He lowered his shirt before he nodded at his 2 teammates. They all stared at each other awkwardly, each trying to think of something to say. Konohamaru rubbed the back of his head nervously before he cleared his throat. So, I hope you guys don't view me differently. He froze as Sakura hugged him tightly. Idiot! She whispered into his hair. How could you ever think we would view you any differently? Konohamaru slumped against her in relief and accepted the hug. Sasuke gave him a pat on the back, content to let Sakura do all the hugging. Sakura frowned, and before Sasuke could react, he was shoved into their embrace. You guys are the best, Konohamaru whispered quietly. Naruto and Riha had been watching the entire exchange quietly before they shared a small glance. Naruto raised his eyebrows, seeing her teary expression, and wordlessly reached into his pouch and handed her a tissue. Riha blew her nose. Oh! That was so beautiful. Naruto rolled his eye before he stood up, stretching, gaining their attention. That was truly heartwarming, but we're here for training, remember? They nodded, separating from their hug, and stood on their feet, immediately readying themselves. Naruto grinned before he gestured for Riha to take cover. You might want to find a comfy branch so you can enjoy the show. She nodded before she kissed his cheek and winked at the trio. Kick his butt, guys. She disappeared in a body flicker, appearing high in a tree branch, having a good view of the entire training field. Naruto I smiled. Alright kiddies, you remember the rules. Let's see how long you last, shall we? Naruto smiled fondly at the memory before he decided that he had been on the defensive enough and it was time for some offense. He flipped forward over them at the same time, grabbing both Sasuke and Konohamaru by their shirts and using his momentum to throw them through the air. He landed gracefully but had to immediately block the strike from Sakura that was aimed for his head. Sakura knew that her strikes could now break bones, but the only sign of pain from her sensei was the tightening of his eye before he returned the blow, knocking the air out of her before he tossed her through the air like her teammates. Both boys were getting to their feet before they were knocked to the ground by a pink blur. Groaning, they all slowly sat up, wincing as they tried to make their heads stop spinning. Naruto was quietly observing them, his form completely relaxed, having not a speck of dirt anywhere. On the other hand, they were covered in dirt and sweating, looking like they had just been dragged through mud. "Ma, come on guys. I'm not even breaking a sweat here," he drawled lazily. Konohamaru grit his teeth. "Well, screw you for being so strong." It was all but impossible to try beat him. All their tactics, all their combinations proved worthless against him. What was even worse was that he openly toyed with them before knocking them into the dirt. Sasuke stayed quiet on the ground. He would admit that he had improved, heck, they all had improved by leaps and bounds over their short period of time together. He hadn't felt stronger. Naruto was an excellent teacher, providing lessons that he soaked up like a sponge in water. He was blunt, unforgiving, held nothing back in training, and for that Sasuke absolutely appreciated the man. But the gap between them seemed to grow wider each day and showed no signs of closing. He would never admit it aloud, but he knew for certain that Naruto was stronger than Itachi. He could feel it in his bones, like a voice silently whispering in the back of his head that this man would lead him to his revenge. He knew if he could at least match his sensei, then he would be ready for Itachi. Despite everything, that desire for revenge still fueled his young mind. And by Kami he needed more training. Every loss just added fuel to his fire. Naruto slowly shook his head. "That's it for today, guys. You all need..." "No." All eyes turned to Sasuke as he struggled to his feet. He grit his teeth as he forced himself to stand before leveling Naruto, a look of raw determination. His Sharingan blazed in his eye, the tomos rapidly beginning to spin. "No," he reiterated. "I'm not finished yet." His courage seemed to fuel his teammates, and Sakura grinned despite her pain and pushed herself to stand beside him. Seeing her struggle, Sasuke offered her a hand and helped her to her feet. "Hell yeah," she grounded out. "I won't quit." Konohamaru watched his teammates in awe before his jaw locked and his eyes flashed red. He tightened his headband around his head and stood shakily on his feet. Naruto saw the feral grin the boy gave him as he thumped a fist against his chest. "Quitting is something I don't do. As much as you knock us down, we'll get back up." Naruto's eyebrow reached his hairline as he watched the three of them stand on shaken legs. He could feel that their chakra reserves were low and their bodies must have been aching from his hits. They even looked like they were about to pass out. Despite it all, their determination shined in their eyes and the desire to win outlasted their pain. "Soon we'll be strong, stronger than even you." Konohamaru thrusted his fist forwards and beside him Sasuke and Sakura grinned. "That's a promise." They echoed. Naruto stared at one face from another before he closed his eye and let a small smile form underneath his mask. Team 7. They were a special bunch. He remembered his comment to Danzo long ago, talking about the hidden potential that this generation had. The village leaders underestimated these kids, but Naruto saw what others could not. Who knows? Maybe he was training the second generation Sannin. He smirked at the thought before he slowly lifted his hand to his headband. Sannin or not, it was time for them to learn defeat. "So you guys want to be stronger than me, eh?" He allowed his Sharingan to spin slowly in his eye. The trio took a hesitant step back as heavy pressure filled the air. A chilling breeze blew through the training grounds, sending a tingling sensation through their spines, before that overbearing pressure suddenly began to increase to the point it became hard to breathe. Naruto's chakra rapidly began to spike at enormous levels. His form became outlined in a blue glow and the ground began to rumble. Ground and rocks in the nearby vicinity began to levitate in the air before disintegrating under the enormous pressure. The blue outline around him became brighter and brighter until it enveloped his form. Behind him his long ponytail danced in the wind and his Sharingan began to glow as his raw, powerful chakra saturated the air. If you want to be stronger than I am, you have to realize the differences in our power. His chakra pulsed out and they were knocked off their feet as lighting sparked around his form and the breeze blowing through the air suddenly turned into a gale force. Know now what that difference is. His already enormous chakra levels began to grow again and the landscape began to tear itself apart. The glow around Naruto became bright enough to the point it became blinding. A hurricane wind blew through the training grounds and the trio had to attach their bodies to ground with chakra lest be blown away. Trees surrounding the area were upheaved from their roots thrown into the wind. The ground heaved under the pressure, leveling large chunks of landscape before suffering the same fate. The sky seemed to darken and fill with ominous clouds as lighting suddenly shot out in all directions. The trio held onto the ground for dear life. This was unreal. They had never felt so much chakra in their lifetime. Even Konohamaru had been subjected to the old man's chakra before and saw how it had damaged the landscape. But he never had felt anything like this. This was unbelievable. He managed to lift his head up off the ground, using his enhanced strength that the Kyuubi's chakra provided him. The wind rippled the skin on his face and his eyes burned from the stinging sensation of the wind. Both his eyes opened wide at the sight that he saw. Naruto's form was completely shrouded by the blue glow, only giving his form a black outline. Lighting continued to spark around him and the wind danced alongside of him. Beneath his feet the ground was sunken, a mini crater forming under the enormous pressure. But all of that didn't cause his heart to stop. His Sharingan glowed red, seeming to highlight against his dark outline. With the shroud covering his form, the only thing he could see was the burning red orb that stared right back at him. Raw killing intent hit his form and he felt the beast inside of him begin to stir. He had never felt so afraid in his life. In the depth of his mindscape, hidden deep in the murky waters behind his cage, the Kyuubi opened its eyes. It swam up to the cage, willing the dark waters to clear to their crystal blue, revealing the pitch-black sky overhead. The once slowly drifting clouds were rapidly moving across the sky and the red of the moon seemed to glow with the color of blood as it began to bleed the dark sky into an ominous red. The beast gripped the bars of the cage with his hands and squeezed. The seemingly unbreakable bars dented ever so slightly. Behind his cage the Kyuubi smirked. Naruto. Yes, he is the one. He had felt it the moment he had laid eyes on him. For his chakra to even affect the environment of the boy's mindscape, he was the true descendant. He had felt chakra like that in only one human in his entire existence. Tilting its large head back and opening its enormous jaws, the Kyuubi's roar echoed through the empty mindscape. In the real world, Konohamaru felt his stomach begin to burn. Whisker marks formed on his face and his features became more feral as his body started to react to Naruto's chakra. Seeing this, the powerful Jonin halted his display of power and the hurricane's wind slowly died down and the darkened sky began to clear. His enormous chakra levels lowered to their normal suppressed levels and the outline around his form vanished. Konohamaru felt the burn cease and he blinked as his features returned back to normal. The rest of Team 7 slowly lifted their heads from the ground and glanced at blank-faced Naruto, then to the surrounding landscape. Their jaws dropped open. Their training ground was ruined. The surrounding trees were bent at unnatural angles, some even occasionally crashing to the ground. The landscape was leveled, scarred to pieces from the rapid lighting strikes, and debris of wood was everywhere. 3 sets of eyes stared wide-eyed at Naruto. He shoved his hands in his pockets and gave them an eye smile. "Ma, I think I went a little overboard." Before anyone could say anything, they heard retching noises and saw Riha stumble out of the forest, dropping to her knees looking relatively unharmed save for puking up her insides. Naruto was immediately by her side in a flash, Team 7 slowly trailing behind, as he tried to help the woman to her feet. "Riha-chan, what's wrong?" Naruto trailed off as he instantly felt incoming chakra signatures, and in the blink of an eye 2 combat-ready platoons of Anbu appeared, followed by a squad of heavily armed military police. Naruto held a hand up. "Oh, my bad guys. Just a false alarm." A familiar cat-faced Anbu marched up to him and before Naruto could react he was smacked upside the head. For the second time that day, 3 jaws dropped open. "Naruto-senpai. You put the whole village on a level 1 alert. What was that again?" "Oh right, the entire military would mobilize and the village would prepare for a skirmish. Civilians were rushed to their homes and rapid deployment teams would be sent out to find and eliminate the threat and blah, blah. The entire country probably felt your chakra." Naruto looked like a kick puppy as he rubbed his head tenderly. Geez, Kat-chan, I was just giving a little demonstration. Your genin were present. She cut him off. What did you want to do, kill them? Naruto I smiled. No, but the little buggers said they wanted to be stronger than me, so I just showed them the measuring ladder. By the looks of their faces they knew it would be a very, very long climb. Underneath her mask Yugao sighed. At times, Naruto was worse than Kakashi. She turned to the contingent of soldiers waving them off. False alarm. Many of the shinobi lost their tense forms and relaxed, but some Anbu stayed guarded around Naruto, deciding to give him a wide berth. She rolled her eyes before she fingered the radio in her ear, relaying orders directly to the Jonin commander. This is Anbu Squad Leader Kat, of Alpha Squad. Reporting that Level 1 alert can be lowered. I repeat, Level 1 alert can be lowered. False alarm. At the affirmative reply over the radio, she released the device and turned her attention back to Naruto. Naruto I smiled. My apologies for the alarm. But I need a medic ASAP. He pointed at the seated blonde beside him. Yugao nodded and gestured to one of the female's officers. The brown-haired woman nodded in acceptance before kneeling before the panting blonde and running glowing green hands across her form. Okay hun, what's the problem? Riha was breathing hard. My stomach, Keeve, hurts. Her skin had taken on a pale hue and perspiration coated her brow. The medic hummed. My diagnostics are telling me you're physically unharmed, but I'm getting nausea build up in your stomach and your nerves are going haywire. Intense preparation and alleviated heartbeat shows signs of extreme. She trailed off, locking gazes with Riha. All eyes turned to Naruto, who was looking at her carefully. His Sharingan spun slowly in his eye, allowing him to see her chakra fluctuating wildly and her increased heart rate. He shifted his head as he saw the medic's chakra become disturbed for a split second before it vanished as quickly. What happened just now? The medic allowed her soothing chakra to calm the woman. Breathe slowly please. Your heart rate is beating too fast. Any faster and you'll go into shock. Riha nodded slowly and began to calm her tense form. Soon enough her breathing calmed and her heart rate lowered. Over the top of the medic's head she caught Naruto's eyes and offered him a small smile. He didn't return it. That heart rate and tense posture didn't just come out of the blue. Before his little show of force, he had felt her chakra start to go haywire. He had thought at first it had been shock, but after he had finished he still felt her chakra fluctuating alarmingly. Almost like she was afraid. Of what? Had he scared her? Made her so frightened to the point she started vomiting? Something wasn't right. Naruto-kun. Hearing the soft whisper, Naruto turned to the cat-masked Anbu before slowly following her as she led him away from the group. Finally having some privacy, Yugao addressed him personally. Geez Naruto-kun, not only did you scare my squad but your own girlfriend too. What are you, some type of sadist? She joked. Naruto chuckled. I'm really sorry about the alarm. He offered sincerely. Yugao smiled underneath her mask. Yeah, you made the higher-ups nearly shit themselves. People thought a tailed beast was attacking from all that chakra. They both laughed quietly before Yugao frowned under her mask. Using his tall form to block any onlooker's line of sight, she took off her mask, partially leaving it hanging off the side of her face. Naruto raised an eyebrow as dark eyes stared up at him seriously. Are the rumors true about you and the Hokage? Ah. So he would guess that there was a mole in the Anbu force for such sensitive information to leak. He knew for certain the old man wouldn't let what happened that night to spread out. The only person Naruto had told was Riha, but he trusted her, right? Rumors in any hidden village tended to spread faster than wildfires, and before he knew it the whole military was gossiping about how the Yellow Fang had taken out an entire Anbu force and attacked the Hokage. Which was untrue. Partially. Naruto sighed. What did you hear? That you cut through the Anbu guard platoon like knife through butter and broke the Hokage's jaw, which is all untrue. Right Naruto-kun? When he didn't respond her eyes grew wide. Tell me it isn't true Naruto. Naruto slowly shook his head. I'm sorry, but it is. Yugao recoiled slightly before her eyes reflected anguish. What are you doing Naruto? Why? Why do this? You can be put to death for Kami's sake. If anything ever happened to him she would never forgive herself. She knew he was a grown man, but the bonds their Anbu team had formed was for life. Plus she made a promise long ago to watch over him. She almost took a step back from the look in his eye. The old man can do nothing. He can't even sue me even if he wanted to. Yugao looked at him in confusion. What happened? Naruto sighed. I can't tell you. At least not here. The less people knew the better. Yugao was someone he would trust with his life. She helped raise him beside Kakashi during his Anbu days. But he had to at least show her what she was dealing with. Yugao, I'll tell you everything when we meet. But I have to know right now, that I can trust you. Her eyes narrowed in anger and underlying hurt. What? You questioning my trust, Naru? She went still as her eyes connected with his Sharingan and a mental conversation took place in the span of a second. Her eyes widened at him and she would have lost her footing if it wasn't for the hands that wrapped around her waist. Can I trust you, Yugao? She saw the silent plea in his eyes and hesitated before nodding slowly. Naruto nearly sagged in relief and pressed a kiss against her forehead. Thank you, Yugao-chan. She smiled at him before she hugged him tightly. You already know I'll stand by your side, Naruto. Captain. The shout caused the two to split apart and Yugao had her mask on in a flash as she turned her attention to her subordinate. Command wants us to report back to HQ. She nodded in acceptance. Roger that. She cleared her throat before beginning to bark out orders. Okay everyone, you heard the man. Back to HQ. The contingent of shinobi began to disperse. The medical officer gave Riha a few whispered words before disappearing as well till only Yugao remained. The female Anbu watched quietly as the blonde woman was fussed over her by the Genin. So that's the girl who stole your heart? Naruto kept his gaze on Riha as Sakura tried to smooth out her hair. Yeah, what's her name? Riha. Underneath her mask, Yugao frowned. Riha. Where have I heard that name before? Naruto glanced at the cat-masked Anbu before turning his attention back to the blonde. Everyone knows her. If anyone knew him then they certainly heard of his blonde-haired girlfriend. Yugao slowly shook her head. No, I mean I heard her name somewhere before. She could have sworn one of the IWA Jonin prisoners at the HQ a few years ago talked about meeting this blonde woman. But the man couldn't remember her face for some reason. Chakra scans to his head showed lingering chakra residue of a certain mind technique indicating that his mind had been partially erased. Whoever she was good. To seduce an A-class Jounin was the work of a professional, but this couldn't be the same girl. Yugao had Naruto's undivided attention. Where? The female Anbu thought about it before she dismissed the memory and waved him off. It's nothing. Probably just confusing her with someone else. Naruto stared at for a few moments before slowly nodding in acceptance. If you say so. Yugao smiled up at him before she nodded to him. I'll see you later, Naruto-senpai. With a flicker of chakra she disappeared before his eyes. A trio of Genin plus Jounin silently walked up to his form. Okay sensei, why in the actual fuck are you so strong? Konohamaru's question pierced the tense silence. I mean holy shit, you nearly killed us from that. Beside him Sasuke nodded, a frown marring his face. So that's your true power, huh? You've been holding back this entire time. He accused with a glare. Sakura poked his chest with a finger. Yeah, even poor Riha-san was affected by that. All eyes turned to the blonde woman. Seeing all the attention on her face flushed. I told you guys I was feeling sick previously. I had nausea from the previous day. The trio laughed at her embarrassment. Why are you lying? Naruto's quiet voice halted their laughter into dead silence. The trio of Genin became wary as he leveled a blank gaze at the woman. They had seen the occasional argument between the two but never seen Naruto look at the woman like that. Ever since I met you, you never showed no signs of nausea or sickness. You always keep your body in perfect shape and occasionally balance your nutrients. Never once had you ever been sick. Yesterday you weren't sick. This morning you weren't sick. The week before that you weren't sick. The trio took a hesitant steps back feeling like they were intruding on a private moment. What's going on, Riha? Naruto's question rang out silently and a set of eyes turned to the blonde woman. She nervously tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Her eyes looked anywhere but his. What? Naruto-kun. She lowered her gaze and mumbled something. Pardon? Naruto inquired. I said you're scaring me. Naruto wasn't the only one to show confusion. His entire team mirrored his expression. Naruto tilted his head at her. I scared you enough to make you start to puke. His sarcasm was evident. You, a seasoned jounin? Puking under a display of power? He raised an eyebrow as he waited her response. Riha stared at him before she slowly lifted a hand to cover her stomach. I'm sorry. Naruto kept up his stare. For lying to you. She slowly lifted her hand, giving him a tearful smile. I didn't want to say this in front of everyone, so I just told the medic I was having some nausea. Seeing his gaze drift to her stomach and then back up to her face, she offered him a careful smile. Team 7 stared in confusion as Naruto suddenly went rigid still. His eyebrows reached his hairline and his didn't drift from her face. Confused out of his mind, Sasuke stared at one face to another. What's going on? Riha let her eyes drift from Naruto before staring at Sasuke. What he heard next caused 3 jaws to drop open for the 3rd time that day. I'm pregnant. Chapter 10, The Root of All Fears 3. That's a load of bullshit. Naruto's quiet whisper caused everyone in the nearby vicinity to jump. He ignored everything and everyone around him, focusing entirely on the blonde woman in front of him. After getting over his initial shock at the radical news, his rational mind started to take focus and he immediately wasn't convinced that this woman in front of him was pregnant. There was absolutely no way the seal he placed on himself was dysfunctional. It was tasked to eliminate any sperm cells that entered the vagina during ejaculation. And the last time he checked, it was in working order and it wouldn't fade for the next 10 years. The only way she could have become pregnant was if he removed the seal, which he didn't plan to do anytime soon. So that's why Team 7 gasped in shock as Riha was hauled up into the air, leaving her feet to dangle as Naruto's hand gripped her throat. Sensei! What are you doing? Sakura immediately made a move to step forward, but she was held back by a stern-faced Konohamaru. Her confusion was evident as he just shook his head. The Uchiha of the team remained quiet, glancing from one adult to another with the tomo of the Sharingan slowly twirling in his eyes. Riha's words were muffled by the hand clamping around her throat as Naruto hauled her higher into the air until his line of sight faced her pelvis. His Sharingan spun rapidly, focusing sharper and sharper, peering into her chakra flow, deep enough for his focus to become microscopic and view the tiny cells coated in chakra slowly floating through her bloodstream. His eyes narrowed to slits at what he saw. Riha's face was beginning to turn blue from the lack of oxygen and she dropped to the ground lifelessly as Naruto opened his fingers, releasing his grip. She heaved desperately, holding her throat as she dry coughed, trying to suck in the much-needed oxygen into her lungs. Team 7 looked on warily. Slowly Naruto went down to one knee, staring directly into her face, as Riha pushed herself up on her palms. He stared blankly into her tearful baby blue eyes. And Naruto, what are you? She trailed off as he leaned in closer, his masked nose slightly brushing against hers. How long have you been pregnant? She stuttered in response. What? Riha nearly squeaked as his sword pierced the ground, right in the place between her fingers. Sharingan burning an angry red, Naruto bared his teeth underneath his mask. How long? He gritted through his teeth. Riha began to shake under his stare. Team 7 gulped as they felt his killing intent start to permeate the air, bringing that uncomfortable pressure that they felt not too long ago. 1 week. Naruto's eyebrows furrowed. He drew himself to his full, imposing height, staring down at her. By the position of the afternoon sun, it shined directly behind him, illuminating him in a golden glow. His form was highlighted by the angry red of his Sharingan, making Riha shiver at the image. Now, why don't I believe you? Naruto questioned menacingly. The question was rhetorical as he ran his thumb slowly down his sword, drawing blood. The blade was left indented into the ground from where he slammed it previously as he began to slowly go through hand seals, to Riha's growing dread. Summoning jutsu. A small pug appeared in pile of smoke, having a small scowl on his face. Ah, bad time, boss. I was chasing some squirrels and... Pakkun trailed off immediately, sensing the hostility in the air. He glanced at a stern-faced Naruto, then to a tearful-eyed Riha and finally to some wary-looking Genin. Yo. He offered lightly. When no one said anything, he frowned. Okay, what's going on, boss? He addressed Naruto, who hadn't once taken his attention off of Riha. Wordlessly the blonde Jounin tilted his head in Riha's direction. Tell me if she's pregnant. Pakkun's eyes went wide at that and he nearly choked on his own saliva. Pregnant? His eyes turned to Riha. The hell? Is this some type of joke? Because this... Pakkun. Naruto's stern voice caused the pug to stiffen. He peered up at Naruto's face, seeing his cold glance. This wasn't a joke. Naruto was serious. His eyes never left the Riha's form as the woman shivered under his unwavering gaze. Pakkun gulped. Naruto wouldn't, he had seen the both of them together, how happy the relationship had made him. But deep down he knew the blonde. He had seen him at his worst. Pakkun resisted the urge to shudder. Naruto wouldn't hesitate. Ever. He nodded in acceptance and slowly trotted up to the sprawled woman. He stopped before her, staring blankly up into her blue eyes, before briefly glancing back at Naruto. He slowly shook his head before he leaned his nose down to her pelvis area and took deep sniffs. Despite the situation, the woman flushed from the nose, poking her private area. The silence was agonizing. The inspection went on for a few minutes. Team 7 glanced to Naruto, seeing him still as statue, unblinking as Pakkun finally finished. The pug stepped back from the woman, staring up into her face. Riha didn't stir under his stare, but the sweat coating her brow betrayed her expression. Pakkun dropped his stare before he trotted back to Naruto. Staring the pug down, Naruto wordlessly awaited his answer. I can smell a fetus growing in her womb. Everyone in the vicinity jumped as they were hit with a chakra pulse. Lightning sparking around his form, Naruto snarled before he started to pace around the training ground, furious. His hands were pulling at his hair and his muttering was filled with curses. He was putting out so much killing intent that his team began to shiver. Riha slowly got to her feet, watching Naruto as he paced around the grounds. She was about to step forward, but a growl made her hesitate, staring down. Team 7 had their eyes wide open as a feral-looking Pakkun bared his teeth. If you want to lose that leg, take another step. Never had they seen the friendly dog look so vicious. Riha frowned but stayed where she was. Pakkun slowly trotted up to Naruto as he paced, sitting on his hind legs, watching him walk back and forth. Boss, his whisper caught the eyes of his master, but Naruto didn't stop his pacing, glancing at Pug out of the corner of his eye. The Pug frowned as he watched Naruto walk, his stride like an angry tiger, his form sparking with lighting. Naruto looked ready to kill. Internally, his mind was racing a mile a minute. He didn't believe it. Even though he saw that thing with his own eyes, and had Pakkun's powerful nose check, he didn't believe for a second that this woman was having his child. He stopped suddenly. Wait 1 fucking second. She. He jumped as he felt the Thunder God marker on his back begin to pulse. Visually aware of the surroundings where any marker was placed, his mind was filled with the image of his shadow clone. He could feel the dangerously low chakra levels of his clone and frowned in worry as it looked like it would dispel in any second. It kept the flow of chakra steady to his seal, ready for Naruto instantly teleport. The pulses came fast in Morse code. TLEPRTNOWROTAGNT.C.A.U.G.H.T. Naruto. Pakkun finally had Naruto's attention as he turned to the small dog. I know you're angry, but my nose doesn't lie. You have to. Wait. All eyes turned to Sasuke. He had been quiet the entire time, watching the exchange. His Sharingan slowly twirled in his eye as he stared at Riha, a frown forming on his face. Naruto turned his full attention to him, slowly beginning to walk closer. Sasuke didn't divert his attention from the woman as Naruto walked closer beside him. Giving the woman a stare that would have made his ancestor proud, Sasuke's voice was cold as steel. When that medic was healing you, I saw her chakra become disturbed. Naruto narrowed his eyes in remembrance. He had seen the chakra disturbance but had been too far away to clarify. He didn't think anything of it, dismissing it as medical chakra interfering with her network. But Sasuke was beside her the entire time. Your chakra briefly fluctuated and her hands went stiff. I would have missed it if I wasn't paying attention to the way your chakra imprinted in her mind. Everyone stared at the blonde whose eyes were growing wide with dread. It's a mind-erasing technique that I've witnessed before. The revelation stunned everyone present into silence. Even Pakkun had his mouth open in shock. Naruto had his eyes scrunched together. Watching her wide blue eyes meet his, he realized it was true. To use a mind-erasing jutsu on a police medic so quickly and discreetly without notice was no small feat. Naruto took a threatening step forward. Okay, enough with your bullshit. I want answers. Now. Riha slowly began to edge back with each step he took. What are you talking about, Naruto? Shouldn't you be happy that you're a father? She asked hesitantly. Naruto's eyes narrowed to slits and he wordlessly held up his hand. His sword rose from the ground and levitated into his open palm. Extending to its full length, the kusanagi blade glinted dangerously under the afternoon sun. "You must be stupid, if you think I believe that child is mine." Team 7 gasped at the revelation. Pakkun grimaced before he began to growl. Riha stopped, having gained a fair amount of distance. Her tearful, frightened visage faded into one of blank empathy. She sighed slowly, shaking her blonde locks. "It looks like I'm found out. What a pity." Naruto narrowed his eyes. Just what the hell was she going on about now? More lies. He resisted the urge to rub his face. She was caught red-handed. Speaking was just making the situation worse. "How did you become pregnant?" Naruto started, slowly striding forward. His team followed, but a warning glance made them stop. He wanted answers. He knew the kid wasn't his. So whose was it? He knew for certain she never could have gotten raped or anything, so that left the only explanation that she had cheated on him. Whatever, he would kill whoever it was and make her watch. Riha remained unintimidated by the incoming danger. Resting a hand on her hip, a slow smirk curved at her lips. "Wouldn't you like to know?" Naruto narrowed his eyes and increased his stride to a brisk walk. Seeing his eyes, she began to giggle quietly. "Is that jealousy I see, Naruto-kun?" She purred. "Would it make you feel better if I say he was bigger than you?" His walk turned into a sprint and Naruto's form blurred across the training field. Let's see if she had kept that smirk when he cut her open. He was no doctor, but he could practice on her how to perform an abortion. He poised his sword ready to cut one of her legs off. He didn't want to kill her yet, just immobilize her and... He froze. Team 7 eyes had widened when Naruto had suddenly started charging the woman, but were shocked into confusion when he suddenly froze. Sasuke's eyes narrowed as he peered at Naruto's chakra flow and saw a foreign chakra source start to appear. Riha had her hands held up into a seal, her face turned into a deceptively beautiful smile. Naruto grunted as his sword fell from his hands. His body was locked into paralyzation as he felt his chakra become disturbed. His eyes glanced down to his body and saw black markings starting to appear, spreading all over his form. His eyes narrowed as he realized the owner of this jutsu, Danzo's binding seal. His eyes glanced forward to the blonde woman holding up her hands into the ram seal. Riha met his eyes as she dropped her hands as the binding seal she had placed on him solidified. Naruto snarled in fury at the realization. Riha was his clone, running on the last of its chakra dispelled, and he shuddered as he was hit with a sudden rush of memories. Mind reeling as 3 days' worth of information resonated in his head. Naruto would have collapsed if wasn't for his frozen body. All the events that his shadow clone experienced was rapidly dumped into his head. His brain was working in overdrive as it tried to short the rapid amount of information, giving him a piercing migraine. All the pain he was feeling was suddenly rendered numb. His eyes went impossibly wide as the information in his head sorted itself and he turned his attention to Riha. Their eyes met and time seemed to stand still around the two. Riha. The betrayal on his face was evident, even with his mask on. So enraptured was he, that he ignored the burning sensation in his eye. Riha's eyes momentarily widened as she saw his Sharingan change shape to 3 stretched triangles evenly spaced around the center pupil. They each curved at the top around his eye, forming a circle, similar to a pinwheel. Naruto didn't even notice. At the sight of Naruto freezing, Pakkun charged with a growl. Team 7 charged after him, Sasuke at the lead with a vicious snarl on his face. Riha gave Naruto a smirk before leaping backwards as Pakkun reached her. The pug jumped for her face, small jaws snapping like a rapid animal. Despite not being a battle type amongst the ninja hounds, at the sight of Naruto in danger he would take on a Hokage. Riha dodged his attacks skillfully, palming a kunai and swiping at the pug's neck. Pakkun rolled through the air to avoid the swipe and landed away from her, growling. Riha smirked at him before she turned her head just in time to dodge the kunai that would have pierced her head. She flicked the kunai in her hand, aiming for Konohamaru, but it was knocked off course. Sasuke rapidly fired a set of shuriken at the woman as she made a steel tanto appearing in her hand in a cloud of smoke as she parried all of them. She didn't have time to pause as both boys blitzed forward and she leapt backwards in the nick of time to miss the slash of Sasuke's kunai that had been aiming for her neck. With his balance off, she slashed forward with her tanto aiming for his eyes. Sasuke's Sharingan spun rapidly, slowing down his perception of time. He ducked the blow, bending to level his back horizontal, smirking when he felt Konohamaru use him as leverage, leaping off his back, striking forward with a kunai in his hand, swiping at her face. She bent backwards just enough for the kunai to nick her hair, allowing for Konohamaru to sail over her. Sasuke grimaced at her flexibility and speed. She was good. She suddenly backflipped, palms on the ground, extending her feet rapidly, clipping Sasuke in the jaw and hitting Konohamaru right between his legs, sending both boys flying opposite of each other. Sasuke and Konohamaru both grunted as they hit the ground, the former landing on his back and the latter his stomach. The both smirked as they pulled on a set of wires. Riha frowned before she glanced down, seeing her feet tied by a nearly invisible wire. Cha! Both boys smirked as Riha's face contorted under Sakura's blow. Her eyes were wide open in shock and spit flew from her mouth as she was sent flying from the impact. Riha impacted the ground harshly before using her momentum to roll herself to her feet. Her beautiful face was marked by the small imprint of a fist, the skin around it turning an ugly shade of purple. She lightly rolled her tongue, tasting blood, before she frowned. Holding up her hand, she spit a tooth into her open palm. Glaring at the Team 7, she crushed the tooth in her hand. Standing side by side in front of their paralyzed sensei, the Genin returned her glare full force. Konohamaru let the Kyuubi's chakra mix with his own, turning his brown eyes red. His slitted eyes narrowed at the woman in front of him. There's only one person I know who uses that same binding seal. Both his teammates briefly glanced at him, keeping their attention on Riha. So you're Root? He said with a snarl. Sakura frowned. Root? It's a secret faction of the Anbu that should have been disbanded. A man named Danzo Shimura is the official leader. Sasuke felt his anger rise at the name. So he was the leader of that organization, Danzo. He would want to question the man over a certain missing nin that was once a member of his Anbu faction. Riha gave him a look of pity. Big words from the failed experiment. They should have just locked you up in a cage like the animal you are. Konohamaru growled at her words before his eyes went wide. Wait, why you? Riha smirked, her eyes taking on a smug look. So you do remember, eh? She cocked her hip. But how much, I wonder? Do you ever wonder why your dad left? She grinned, seeing his eyes burn with tears. I must say, you Sarutobi men are as wild as the monkeys you raise. Naruto's eyes narrowed at the implications. He snarled at her, his voice thick with emotion. You fucking whore. How dare you? She ignored Naruto, focusing on Konohamaru as his eyes were wide. And no. It's not true. He stuttered. She grinned. Sorry, but he couldn't keep his hands off of me. She shrugged. I can't even blame him. He had to come home to a constantly crying wife and a son that was turned into a monster. He needed release. She licked her lips. I just gave him what he wanted. Konohamaru let the tears flow at her stinging words before his form began to shake. The tears running down his face rapidly evaporated as the burn of the Kyuubi's chakra started to take effect. His form glowed red and an intense killing intent rolled off of him. Opening his mouth, he let out a bestial roar before he charged forward. Sasuke tried to grab him, but the enraged Genin was too fast. Konohamaru was before the woman in a flash, his hand cocked back and ready to smash her face in. Riha ducked the blow, slicing at his arm with her tanto. Konohamaru didn't flinch or give any indication he felt pain as he attacked like a wild animal. His form was sloppy and wild, his anger hindering his attacks. With every blow he missed, he received slices to his muscles and tendons, leaving his form bloody. She snapped her leg forward, snapping his head back, dropping him, and griped her tanto ready to slice his throat. Sasuke was already flashing through hand seals, inhaling as his throat filled with chakra. Fire release, Phoenix Flower Jutsu. A volley of small fireballs spewed out of his mouth, arcing around Konohamaru's downed form, locked onto the traitorous blonde. She backflipped, skillfully dodging them before flipping through hand seals of her own. Water release, Water Wall. A shield of water appeared, blocking the rest of the fireballs, coating the area in a cloud of steam. Riha used the moisture in the air to her advantage, inhaling the steam. Blitzing through hand seals, she returned the favor, sending a volley of water balls at Sasuke. Sasuke's Sharingan rapidly spun, and with great reflexes he dodged all of them, twirling gracefully. He wasn't prepared as Riha spat out a huge ball of water that rocketed towards him. His eyes widened and he quickly managed to spew out some flames, but they were snuffed out by the water, and spit flew from his mouth as the water hit him like a bullet. He was sent flying from the impact. Konohamaru's anger vanished at the sight and he jumped in time to intercept Sasuke, grunting as he caught him. Both boys landed in a heap, Sasuke grinding his teeth together in pain, grabbing his injured stomach. He lifted his shirt to reveal the damage the pressurized water ball had done. The skin around his stomach had turned a mixture of purple and red. He was sure a rib had cracked from the pressure attack. Riha narrowed her eyes seeing only 2 genin and she ducked the blow from behind. Sakura had her face set into a scowl as the agile woman danced around her before catching her wrist and turning the girl around with an arm behind her back. Sakura let out a pained whimper as the woman twisted her arm painfully. Bending enough to whisper into her ear, Sakura growled as the woman licked her ear. Little girls shouldn't pretend to play ninja, Sakura-chan. Sakura grinded her teeth together before spitting on her feet. Slut! Go suck a d, ah! Riha sked, twisting her arm. What a bad-mouthed girl. Didn't her parents teach her to treat her elders with respect? She twisted the arm enough for tears to prick at Sakura's eyes. Seeing both boys rise to her feet, she gestured for them to stop. If you want me to snap Sakura's arm like a twig, please move. She said cheerfully. Sasuke and Konohamaru stopped in their tracks. Both their forms were bruised, looking exhausted. Sasuke was nursing his stomach and Konohamaru was sporting bloody wounds that were slowly healing. Riha smirked before turning her attention to a livid Naruto. She blew him a kiss, giggling at the look in his eyes. Ah, you upset Naruto-kun. If looks could kill, she would have been dead a long time ago by his gaze alone. Naruto's form twitched with rage as he fought against the cursed seal. Bitch! If you hurt them, I'll skin you alive. Despite his rage, he was in mental turmoil. All this time this woman was nothing more than a spy, a seductress. Sent from Danzo to get his genes. He didn't know what was more disgusting, the fact that he had loved or the amount of men and women she had slept around with. She twisted Sakura's arms, winking at Naruto's before turning her attention to the boys. Sasuke sneered at her face. Why Riha? Why betray sensei? He snarled before coughing as his movements roused his broken ribs. Riha just sighed. You are all so naive to think I'm the same woman you knew since we met. She peered blankly at the two. I'm a seductress. I am sent in to either assassinate or spy on. I never cared about any of you, to be honest I never even liked any of you. But I'll admit, I did feel sorry for you lot. She finished, giving them a look of mock pity. Naruto sneered at her. So that time you met me in the bar, that was when you started your mission? What happened next surprised everyone present. Riha titled her head back and laughed long and hard. She laughed so hard that she had to wipe away the tears that hard started to form. Despite everything, the sound was pleasant to the ears, fake as the personality that she had used to fool them all. Riha took a few moments to compose herself, holding Sakura. Oh Naruto-kun. She shook her head. You're so pathetic. Both boys bristled at jab and even Sakura managed to glare up at her. She ignored them, focusing on Naruto. You were the easiest prey I ever had. I mean, I wasn't even trying. What a poor bastard you are, to be so respected, so feared, yet at the same time so lonely and isolated. No wonder your life was so miserable. It was so easy to learn everything about you, even your weakness. Imagine that you didn't even notice the binding seal I had placed on you. You must have been desperate. She smirked. I guess the saying is true, all men are dogs. Just pet them right and they'll become obedient little slaves to your every whim. Riha laughed, seeing everyone's expressions. Look at Big Bad Team 7. How does it feel to know you're all as pathetic as your sensei? As I mentioned, I pity all of. A small body suddenly busted out of the ground under her feet and Pakkun's jaws snapped around her ankle. Riha shrieked, releasing Sakura from her hold and swiped at the pug with her tanto. Sakura immediately spun and used her uninjured arm to knock the blade from her grip. Sasuke and Konohamaru seized the moment, charging forward, ignoring their pain. This bitch was dead. The moment she started bad-talking the one man they respected more than anything, sealed her fate to a very, very painful death. Sakura cocked her fist ready to send the woman flying with an uppercut but received a blow so hard, her nose broke, dropping her to the ground in a heap. Snarling, Riha stomped on the pug hard enough for something to crack before she kicked the small body away. Just as the boys were upon her, she flashed through hand seals and both of them froze in their movements. Both genin locked up as they felt woman's chakra invade their nervous system, and to their horror, the kunai in their hands started to turn on each other. Both Konohamaru and Sasuke shuddered as the knives pricked at their throats. Despite her promiscuous nature, she was one of Danzo's best. Considered even better than her brother because of her talent with her clan's techniques. Her mental prowess could even be considered telekinetic. Riha smirked before dropping her hands. That should hold you for now. She grimaced before tenderly rubbing her wounded ankle. That damn dog. Thank Kami it had been only Pakkun. She didn't think she would be able to handle all his ninja hounds together. Speaking of the dog, she had wondered if he had disappeared, but the sneaky pug had been hiding. He was of no importance now. She retrieved her fallen Tonto, smirking down at Sakura. She roughly kicked the girl in her side, getting her to whimper. Sakura grunted as a foot stomped on her stomach. Unforgiving, Riha stomped harder and harder to the point Sakura began to cough out blood. Both Genin and Sensei watched helpless as the young girl was ruthlessly stomped on till her ribs gave way to the force. Sakura turned to the side and puked out blood, heaving as her body shook. Riha sighed, stroking her hair before she turned to a tearful Naruto. Ah, is the yellow fawn going to cry? She poised her sword ready to pierce Sakura's throat. Stop! Leave them out of this! Naruto shouted desperately. This is between you and me. Riha just shook her head. Naruto, you should realize now that your life is nothing but failures. She held up her 4 fingers, ticking them down. I mean, your parents died, your sibling died, your sensei died, and now, you have to watch your students die. She finished smugly. Naruto's form twitched. You fucking bitch. I swear I'll kill you. I'll cut you to pieces, you whore. Riha laughed. Oh, how she loved the old names. How you going to do that? She asked lightly. Naruto sneered under the mask. I'll get you just like I did your brother. He would have laughed at her expression. She had immediately lost her smiling face and adopted one of complete seriousness. Her baby blue eyes narrowed at him. Naruto grinned underneath his mask. That's right. I fucked him up real good. You should have seen how a grown man moaned like a bitch every time I cut through his mind. Left him so mentally scared he won't be able to wipe his own ass for the rest of his life. Riha's blinked in realization. That's how you found out. Fu. She whispered. Naruto would have nodded if it wasn't for the seal. That's right, Fu. I tell ya, he puts the F-U in fucked because that's what he is right now. But you? No mercy for you. His form twitched violently as the Mangekyo Sharingan began to glow. I'm going to kill your brother and make you watch as I torture him alive. But this time I won't use genjutsu. No, I'm going to use my bare hands and rip your fucking eyes out. Tear you apart limb from limb, then shove that fetus down your fucking throat till you choke to death, you root slut. Naruto heaved tensely, his form quivering as he tried to calm his racing heart. Riha blinked back the threatening tears in her eyes before her pretty face schooled of emotion. She wordlessly held up a hand seal and both Sasuke and Konohamaru began to panic as the knives edged closer to their throats. Bearing an insane grin, she stared at Naruto. Well, let's see how tough you are after you witness your precious students kill each other. Sasuke used sheer willpower alone to try and hold his knife back, but it was a losing battle. Konohamaru growled before his eyes bled red, and he used his enhanced strength to try and hold the knife, as it began to pierce the skin on their necks. Stop! Naruto cried out. Seeing she wasn't listening, he snarled. Damn it, I'll tell you where your brother is. Riha finally acknowledged Naruto but still held up the ram sign. Why should I? She finally questioned after a pause. Naruto sneered at her. If you kill them, you'll never see your brother again. That I can promise. She sneered back. You'll tell me where he is or I'll kill your brats. She shouted. Naruto would have spit on the ground if it wasn't for his mask. Bitch, please. Would you really sacrifice the safety of your only sibling over a mission? Isn't Danzo going to kill the both of you if you fail? He added smugly, seeing her face. That's right, I know everything. You call me lonely, but that asshole is the only person you have left. And if you don't release my students, you'll never see him again. Naruto kept his face blank as he saw Pakkun sneaking up behind her. Riha narrowed her eyes at him before she dropped her seal. Both Sasuke and Konohamaru gave a sigh of relief as their hands lowered. That was close way to close. Konohamaru wanted to. Naruto's eyes went wide as the Riha grinned and held up her seal again. With a crazed glint her eye she laughed and activated her jutsu. Slick! Konohamaru blinked staring into Sasuke's wide eyes. Seeing his reflection in the Sharingan he witnessed blood running out of his mouth and glanced down to see Sasuke's kunai had pierced him, directly in the heart. Sasuke watched as Konohamaru gave a bloody cough before his form stepped back, free of Riha's control. Konohamaru slowly lifted his hand over his heart before he shuddered and fell backwards impacting the ground lifelessly. Sasuke watched as his best friend laid on the ground unmoving. He ignored everything around him, not noticing Naruto's shouts or the way Pakkun had leapt onto Riha's arm and started biting with all his strength. Foolish little brother. The words resonated through his mind and a searing heat stirred from within. The last thing Sasuke felt was an intense burn before he saw black. Naruto watched Sasuke fall shortly after Konohamaru and willed back his burning eyes. Pakkun was still attached to her arm and the crazed woman was punching him with all her strength. Naruto watched as Pakkun kept up his grip, snarling with each hit. His gaze turned to Sakura, the girl having lost unconsciousness from her pain, and then to both Konohamaru and Sasuke. Tears ran down his eyes as he witnessed the state of his team. It was his fault. All his fault. First it was the Hokage, then Danzo, and now the woman that he had loved. Why? What had he ever done to deserve this? Having his life ruined by the people around him. The village that he had protected for all his life was his worst enemy. His parents sacrificed their life to save this very village, and in return their only son was tormented like he was in a living hell. Naruto bit back a sob. Dispel Pakkun. Dispel. He commanded. But the dog didn't obey. He just kept his jaws locked, ignoring her blows. The pack was in danger, it was his duty to protect it with his life. Naruto is his master and Team 7 his students. They were entitled his protection even if it killed him. It was the rule of law for dogs. Riha, fed up with the annoying pug, palmed a kunai and stabbed Pakkun. The pug gave a pained whimper but didn't let go and was subjected to repeated stabs. Slick, slick, slick. Naruto shuddered as he watched. Damn it, dispel. His voice broke and he whimpered as he watched Pakkun drop lifelessly to the ground. His shiny brown fur was stained with blood and the blue vest he wore had turned purple. Naruto watched as the headband the pug wore untied, clattering to the ground. He didn't move. Riha dropped the bloody kunai and let out a hiss, glancing at her mangled arm. How she hated dogs. The meat of her arms was showing and her skin was mangled down to the bone. Her once beautiful skin was left hanging from the side, coated in blood and teeth. She sneered down at the pug before she kicked the small body, sending it rolling. A piercing killing intent froze her to the spot. Trembling, her gaze turned to Naruto and she gasped. Riha took a step back from the look in his eye as his Sharingan began to spin. I'll kill you. I'll kill you. I'll kill you. Naruto kept up the mantra, heaving as his body began to tremble. He roared using every ounce of his strength and his body began to move. Riha gawked in shock, witnessing the impossible. He was overcoming the cursed seal through sheer rage. Naruto kept repeating the mantra, ignoring the burn of his muscles, till the lines on his body started to flicker. Inch by inch his body began to move. He took heavy step forward, leaving his foot indented into the earth. Soon enough, his form began to walk, heading steadily in her direction. Riha tried to move but her body was paralyzed with fear as his raw killing intent hit her. He looked like death incarnate, snarling like a rabid animal as his powerful chakra started to saturate the air. The Mangekyo Sharingan began to rapidly spin in his eye and Naruto's body broke into a slight jog, rapidly gaining speed. With each step he took, the earth rumbled as the amount of chakra he was giving off was so thick she felt her throat constrict. Naruto was well into a sprint when Riha found the strength to flee. She turned on her heel and ran as fast as her legs could take her, running for dear life as death was close on her heels. Naruto roared and fought off the last effects of the cursed seal and his legs began to blur as he hit full speed. That bitch wouldn't get away. As his eyes focused on her, willed all his hatred at her body, just willing for it to slow. He wanted to catch her and rip her apart with his bare hands. He felt his Sharingan pulse and his pupils suddenly felt heavy, almost if a pressure was building up in his eye. Over Riha's form, time and space began to distort and she felt the air recede around her, almost like she was getting sucked into a vacuum. Naruto felt the pressure wanting to explode in his eye and the distortion solidified into black hole. Naruto shuddered as his eye felt like it would fall out of the socket from the sudden pressure, and his head dropped. His gaze widened as the black hole followed his line of sight. When a nearby tree came into view, Naruto's gaze fell on it and the tree began to distort before it shattered as it was warped into a void of time and space. Naruto would have grinned as Riha's wide eyes witnessed what happened to the tree, if the strain of his eye wasn't so painful. The traitorous blonde pushed every ounce of chakra she had to her legs and increased her speed. Naruto was right behind her and drifted his gaze to her form. He focused his gaze directly to her head and the black hole fell on his line of sight. He felt that same pressure build up and willed it to focus on the blonde. But that same heavy sensation came with the pressure and his gaze dropped. Riha didn't have time to scream as her arm was warped from his socket. Naruto suddenly felt a stinging pain in his eye and pushed down the buildup of pressure, the black hole vanishing in response. Naruto had slowed to a walk as he felt his chakra rapidly dip and suddenly felt lightheaded. He had to lean on a tree for support as his form panted. He held a hand over his Sharingan, trying to coax the burn. He ignored his discomfort, glaring at the injured woman. In front of him, Riha had fallen to the ground holding her now stump of an arm. Hearing footsteps, she turned her attention to Naruto and grimaced as he saw the look in his eye. She vainly began to crawl on the ground using her one arm in a desperate attempt to escape. Naruto took his time, slowly walking forward as he felt his Sharingan stop burning and the familiar minuscule drain returned to normal. He removed his hand from his eye, cracking his knuckles. Whatever happened to his eye just now, it was draining his chakra like a leech. In front of him, Riha pulled herself up with her remaining arm, leaning heavily on a tree. She held up her one arm in surrender. "Naruto, please wait." She didn't have time to finish as Naruto blitzed forward, punching her so hard that her body went through the tree she had been leaning on, shattering a few more trees behind her and stopping with a sudden crack. Riha coughed out blood before glancing up to the sandaled feet in front of her. Such speed was too much for her. Naruto stomped down her head and grinded his foot on her face. He kicked her so hard she flipped over and then proceeded to stomp on her like she done to Sakura. Her body sunk into the earth with each blow before Naruto stomped one final time, leaving her buried into the earth. He watched as her arm wailed around wildly as she was buried alive. Naruto let her suffocate for a few moments before he reached into the earth. Riha shrieked in pain as she was grabbed by her hair, coughing as she spit out mud and dirt. Naruto hauled her up into the air, mercilessly pulling at her blonde strands, holding her high enough for her feet to leave the ground. Form muddy, Riha continued to cough as Naruto pulled her strands so hard a few started to rip from their roots. Naruto wordlessly held his free hand up and he only had to wait a few moments for his sword to levitate into his waiting palm. Riha thought he would immediately make it quick and chop off her head, but she whimpered as his blade rested horizontally on her side. Naruto's blank eyes met hers as he started sawing her in half. Literally. Riha screamed as the blade went through the Kevlar of her vest, reaching the tender skin underneath as Naruto moved his hands back and forth, the sword cutting away at her flesh. The blade pierced the skin, going back and forth deeper and deeper till it reached her collarbone. Blood poured out of the wound, but Naruto still continued his motions, all intentions of sawing her in half. "Wait!" Riha screamed desperately as blood poured from her mouth. Naruto didn't even glance at her. He was entirely focused on cutting her in half, as his eyes never strayed from the motions of his hands. Riha screamed again as she felt her bone being cut as her vision was clouded with tears. Gritting her bloody teeth together, she screamed the first thing that came to mind. "I'm pregnant with an Uzumaki." The sawing instantly stopped. Blood was pouring from her side like a fountain, and by the way she was held by her hair, her blood dripped to the ground below, quickly forming into a puddle. Naruto left the blade wedged inside of her but jammed the blade into a tree, ignoring the way she screamed again. Pinned against a tree, held up by a blade inches into her side, Riha couldn't contain her sobs. Naruto watched her cry with a sneer forming on his face. He cracked his knuckles before he unleashed some blows that shook her skull. He stopped as her nose gave way and the woman sobbed pitifully. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold and uncaring. "Look at you. A few minutes ago you couldn't stop smiling and now you're crying like a little girl. Where's your spunk?" Riha coughed out blood before she opened her mouth to speak. "Please, Belly." She was stopped again as Naruto slapped her so hard that the tree saved her head from snapping. Lip busted and bruised, Riha glanced to Naruto's cold eyes. "Don't speak." He made a hand seal and suddenly an armored body appeared instantly through a void of time and space, landing on the ground. Fu was still in the same condition Naruto had left him in, with his eyes wide open and unfocused. Riha screamed from her position at the sight of her brother. Naruto used the blood on his fingers to blitz through hand seals again, slamming his hand on the ground. Summoning jutsu. His entire ninja hound team appeared in cloud of smoke. The beta male of the group, a sunglass-wearing tan dog, addressed Naruto with a bow. "Yo boss," Akino quipped. He immediately caught the scent of blood and his eyes widened behind his sunglasses as he saw Riha pinned to a tree. The ninja hound saw the sword indented into her side and wordlessly turned to Naruto. "She killed Pakkun." His voice was without emotion. Before Riha's eyes she witnessed the whole group turn feral, no longer the kind-hearted animals she was used to. Naruto had to quickly restrain Bull by his collar as the large dog snapped his jaws inches from Riha's face. "Easy." Naruto's firm voice silenced them as he asserted his dominance. Bull stopped his attacks, but Naruto had to pull him firmly to get him to back away from the women. He kneeled beside the large dog, giving him some calming pats before he stood. Glaring at Riha, he pointed to Fu. "If you value your brother's life, start talking." A white and brown furred pit bull stuck his tongue out, watching as the blood dripped down her body. "Can I eat a leg, boss?" Urishi panted. "She's not going anywhere, right? Plus it's been a long time since I tasted human." At his words many of the dogs licked their lips unknowingly, causing Riha to shudder. This was the sweet dogs that used to snuggle beside her. They looked rabid, ready to tear her apart at a moment's notice. Naruto briefly glanced at the pit bull before looking at Riha. "Hear that? My boys are hungry. You can already guess that bitch is on the menu, so start talking." Riha bit her lip before conceded, "Okay, I'll tell you everything, just please don't hurt Fu." She begged pathetically. Naruto raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. Thinking over her request, he stroked his chin, glancing up at the trees. "You're really in no position to make requests, but tell you what, if you behave like a good slut, I'll stop all of this right now." His hound stared at him in confusion, but he ignored them. Riha nodded tearfully before she started speaking. "Not long ago, I was approached by one of the village elders. They wanted to arrange a meeting between the Hokage and I." She gasped as the Naruto willed the sword to edge deeper into her wound. "Why would the old man be interested in you?" he questioned. She gasped before she coughed out blood. "He has spies en route." She coughed. "He heard about Danzo wanting me pregnant." Naruto's eyebrows furrowed, already piecing everything together. His cold stare met her tearful eyes. He wouldn't," he whispered. She nodded in pain, wordlessly answering his question. Naruto's gaze took on a look of murder before he willed his mind to calm lest he accidentally killed her. "Where does he keep his labs?" Riha shook her head. "I don't know. I was put to sleep the moment I woke up. The procedure had already been completed." Naruto shook his head. "Not good enough." He raised a hand and his dog surrounded Fu's body, saliva dripping with hunger. "He forced me to do it, Naruto. I swear." She shouted desperately. "He threatened my life and Fu's. He knows everything. About Danzo's plans for civil war, wanting to be Hokage, everything." Naruto glared at her. Why would the old man want Danzo dead? Aren't they partners? It didn't make any sense. The old man worked in the light, while Danzo worked in the dark. Despite their differences, they still worked towards the common goal of protecting Konoha. So why would he want his rival dead? He doesn't want any loose ends. She whispered in pain. Naruto furrowed his eyebrows at that, walking closer to peer up into her face. Loose ends? The night of the Kyuubi attack. She gasped. Danzo saw what Hiruzen did. Naruto felt his heart clench. Was there more than the old man using his dead sibling? What could he have done that was so serious that he wanted even Danzo dead? His heart hammered against his chest. Tell me. Riha stared at him before her eyes flickered to Fu. Let us go and I'll tell you. Naruto stared at her. Was she honestly trying to compromise with him? Riha, I think you misunderstand who you're talking to. Both you and your brother are going to die. No amount of begging will change that. With that, Naruto snapped his fingers and his ninja hounds snarled before ripping into Fu's body like savages. Riha screamed as his body was torn limb from limb, piece by piece, under powerful jaws till there was nothing left. Bull had the man's head in his jaws before he snapped his jaw shut, the sound of crunches and bones cracking as he chewed. Riha shrieked like a woman dying as she thrashed around like she was mad. Naruto roughly slapped her hard before grabbing her throat to hold her in place. "Focus right here, sweetheart." He pointed to his face, grabbing his sword and digging it deeper into her side. "Hey! Focus on me." He released his sword but not his grip on her throat, when broken blue eyes turned to him. "Good. Now, as I mentioned before, tell me. Now." Riha opened her mouth, puking out blood before she let out a helpless moan. "You bastard! You killed him, you killed him." She kept up the mantra before Naruto increased his grip to silence her. He resisted the urge to just snap her neck. "Tell me." He grounded out inches away from crushing her throat. Riha gargled before he eased his grip and she coughed again before her head fell back. He was going to kill her. He didn't even blink when Fu was torn apart. She might have fooled him, but he had been hiding things from her as well. His true nature. The violent killer who wouldn't hesitate to kill. To slaughter. This was the real Naruto. The yellow fawn. "Your mother." She moaned. Naruto's eyes widened as her body locked up and froze. He stared in confusion before he peered into her chakra flow with his Sharingan and saw the curse seal on her head activated. He cursed, realizing he had forgotten all about it. "Fuck!" He growled. He had acted too quickly and lost what could have been his only chance in getting the hidden answers to what happened that night. She had been saying something about his mother. Naruto's mind raced at the implications. Danzo had something to do with his father's death and now the Hokage had a hand in his mother's. Those fucking old geezers, he was going to rip out their throats. He roughly grabbed his sword and pulled it out, allowing the woman to drop to the ground. Her form was frozen, save for her eyes as they stared up at him. His hounds came forward ready to tear her apart, but Naruto held up a hand. "I know root agents will be coming for you, so I'm going to leave you alive." Naruto glared down at her with all his hatred. "I want you to give Danzo a message for me." He flipped through hand seals before his hands pulsed with power and Naruto placed them on top of her head. Riha moaned in pain as an intense burn started at her head before running through her body. It was so intense that the hairs on her head were burnt away by the amount of chakra Naruto was running through her. Seal. Black markings solidified before they vanished. He kneeled before he staring into her crying blue eyes. His gaze held no amount of sympathy as he stared at her. In their final moments, people show you who they really are. As I glance at you now, I see nothing but a worthless sack of flesh, beaten at her own game, not able to handle the consequences of being caught. Is Danzo training cowards? It doesn't matter, because I saw your life through Fu's memories. You became a whore, lived as whore, and now you will die as whore. Who's pathetic now? Her eyes misted at his words. Is the slut going to cry? Here, let me dry those tears. His hands sparked with lightning and Riha moaned in agony as her eyes were melted shut. The worst mistake you could have ever made was agreeing to your mission. And you know what the worst thing is? I could have saved you. You were forced as children to join Root. That I can sympathize with, but you personally chose to sleep with people and ruin lives. He shook his head. Imagine if you chose differently, maybe we could have been together. He touched her body lightly and removed his hand, watching as a mark appeared before vanishing. He sighed, the Shinigami will come for your soul. Eternal damnation awaits you. In its stomach you can ponder how stupid enough you were to try and fool me. He stood raising himself to his full height before he turned on his heel. He took a step before he hesitated. Oh, almost forgot. Riha could do nothing but moan in agony as his sword extended, piercing her pelvis. Willing it to recede to its normal length, Naruto sheathed the blade. He willed his hounds to dispel, not even sparing her a glance, and disappearing in a burst of speed, rushing back to his team. Arriving at his team, Naruto immediately went to Konohamaru first. He had been pierced in the heart and Naruto didn't know if the Kyuubi's chakra could heal such damage. Stopping before the boy, he glanced over him, seeing his shirt coated in blood. He lifted up his shirt and frowned at he saw. The wound was healed. But peering into his chakra flow, he could see no heartbeat. He wasn't even breathing. Naruto began to rub his hands together, the friction causing his hands to spark with lightning. Satisfied that he had given them a significant charge, he placed them over Konohamaru's chest right over his heart, and willed his chakra to give an electrical charge. Konohamaru's body jerked but didn't give any indication of resuscitation. Naruto cursed. Fuck, come on Ko. He rubbed his hands together again, sparking them with more chakra before he repeated his actions. Konohamaru's body jerked and the Genin dry coughed as he was resuscitated. He was still unconscious, but at least he was breathing again. Naruto sighed with relief, peering at his beating heart before shifting his shirt back down. He glanced at Sasuke, seeing the boy unconscious, holding a hand over his stomach and eyes. Naruto looked into his chakra flow, seeing a flicker of chakra that was rapidly pulsing behind his eyes. Naruto put a hand against his head and focused his chakra into Sasuke's head, and the flickering behind his eyes stopped. He gently lifted his shirt and frowned at the bruised skin. Cracked ribs. He mused with a frown. It wasn't as bad as he had thought. He put his shirt back down before glancing over to Sakura. Naruto's form flickered, reappearing before Sakura. He frowned down at her, seeing the damage already. She was unconscious but still breathing. But her breaths were shallow and faint. Kneeling before her, he put a hand over her stomach and ran his chakra through her. Broken ribs, internal bleeding, severe blunt force trauma, ruptured liver, weak heartbeat. He trailed off, not wanting to list the rest. He closed his eyes and willed his anger to calm. He calmly figured one of the pockets on his vest and pulled out a red signal flare. Aiming it upwards, he let his chakra run through it and a bright red ball shot upwards into the air. He didn't have to wait long to feel rapidly incoming chakra signatures and was soon surrounded by one of Konoha's rapid response squads. A familiar cat-masked Anbu was before him in a flash. "Oh my kami, Naruto-kun, what hap, medic now?" She shouted instantly, and 2 medics came forward. Naruto did indeed look like hell. He was covered in blood and there were bags under his eyes. His chakra was low, but he was virtually unharmed. "I don't need medical attention," he growled. "My students do." The medics nodded before moving on to Sakura, running glowing green hands over her form. The other one moved to the boys, doing the same. Naruto watched them work in silence before his eyes widened, and Yugao watched in confusion as he disappeared. In the blink of an eye he appeared again, carrying something bloody in his hands. Naruto held Pakkun carefully in his arms. "I need another medic now." Yugao removed her mask at the sight and held a hand over her mouth as her eyes filled with tears. Who could have done this? Another masked Anbu appeared before them and carefully took the small body from his hands and gently placed him on the ground. Naruto watched as his hands glowed green with rising anxiety. Behind his mask the operative frowned. An extremely weak pulse, but he's still alive. Naruto sagged in relief. His eyes burned with tears and he felt his head get light before his eyes closed. Yugao could only open her arms to catch his body as exhaustion finally caught up with him, and Naruto welcomed the darkness. Naruto dreamed of Konoha on fire that night. Everywhere black flames were consuming anything and everything in their path. Dead bodies littered the streets as structures collapsed under the intense heat. The smell of death was strong in the air, and despite it, Naruto found himself walking forward. The farther he walked, the more bodies appeared. Naruto glanced around at the destruction, just wonder what or who could have caused so much destruction to the most powerful village in the nations. All around him shinobi and civilians alike were dead, pieces of their bodies laid out mixed with debris. He momentarily paused as he became for the sight of the village elders. Their bodies were bloody and bruised, but they were still alive. They were tied together on a single pole of wood laid erect for all to see. What caught his attention were the black flames that were slowly crawling up the wood. Soon enough it reached them, and their screams rang through the night as they were burned alive. Naruto watched as Hamura and Koharu screamed as the flesh of their naked bodies were consumed by the black flames. He stared at them before continuing his walk. For some reason something willed him not to help them even if he wanted to. More destruction and death became apparent the deeper he ventured inside of the village. This time he did stop as he came before a sight that made him nearly want to puke. Danzo was pinned to a wall. More specifically, his body parts were pinned to a wall. His arms, legs, torso and head were all separated from each other and pierced to the wall with a kunai. It wasn't the brutality of it that made him freeze, but the way his body parts were set in a way to spell a single word: root. Naruto stared at the dead man before glancing back the way he came, listening as Hamura's and Koharu's cries finally stopped as the wooden pole collapsed from the black flames. An explosion caught his attention and he glanced forward. Naruto took off in a sprint, running as fast as his legs could carry him, ignoring the way his sandals became coated in blood. He came to halt before the Hokage Tower. The symbol of fire was coated an angry red as the Hokage Tower burned, black flames illuminating against the melting red. He glanced atop to the balcony where the sound of fighting was heard. He heard shouts and cries before he saw the figure of the third Hokage was thrown off the building and sent crashing into the ground below. His black armor was melting as black flames danced along his form. Still alive, the man crawled on the ground helplessly. He stopped and his eyes glanced upwards, landing on Naruto's shocked gaze. Being burned alive, he shuddered before his head fell lifelessly as his form was consumed. His eye caught movement and he glanced back to the balcony to see a figure emerge at the top. But from the dark night he could only make out the bright red cloak that the figure adorned. Cloak billowing behind him, dancing in the wind, the unknown figure let out a bestial roar of triumph so loud that very crumbling foundations of the village shook and Naruto was forced to cover his ears. Naruto removed his hands before glancing up at the figure. The red moon in the sky was blocked by equally red clouds. At his roar the clouds moved as if running away from the sound, allowing the red light to illuminate the tower. Naruto's eyes widened as the figure was revealed to him. A spinning Sharingan stared down at him. Naruto's gawked at the sight. He had done this. But how could he do this to the village? Why would he do this to the village? His questions were halted as the ground shook and behind the burning Hokage Tower emerged the Kyuubi, its 9 tails swaying hypnotically behind it. Naruto gasped. The Kyuubi? How was it free? Where was Konohamaru? By the fires of the tower its wide grin looked like the face of death. Naruto became alarmed as the Kyuubi lowered its head towards the cloaked Naruto and he thought for sure his other self would be eaten. But his eyes widened as the cloaked Naruto leapt atop of the Kyuubi's head before raising himself to his full height atop of the beast. Naruto could do nothing but stare as man and beast stared down at him from the raging black fires of the tower, the red light of the moon illuminating their forms. If there was ever a perfect picture of death, then he was staring at it right now. The other Naruto wordlessly reached behind him and pulled out something white. He threw the object downwards and Naruto caught it as it fluttered gently towards him. He stared at the Hokage's hat before he returned his attention back to his other self. He was alerted as the cloaked Naruto started to flash through hand seals and finished clasping his hands together. Naruto shuddered as chill went down his spine. His eyes widened as something formed in the air before the duo and he had to take a step back in fear as it solidified. Form ethereal and unworldly, a giant translucent gaunt specter with a demonic visage appeared in a swirl of light. Naruto took a step back as the Shinigami stared down at him. It opened its mouth revealing rows of sharp teeth and long serpentine tongue ran along its lips. The death god wordlessly turned towards the cloaked Naruto and he gestured to ruined village. What he said next caused Naruto to freeze. Enjoy. Naruto snapped awake, raising himself up abruptly. Thump. Kurenai hissed, holding her head in pain as she stumbled backwards, letting out a string of curses. Naruto nursed the bump on his head, scowling in pain before he opened his eyes and glanced around him. Kakashi's entire age generation stared back at him. Naruto blinked. He held up a hand lazily. Yo. He offered lamely. Kurenai composed herself, sneering at him as she nursed her bruised forehead. Geez, why am I always getting attacked around you? A few chuckles were heard but were silenced as her red eyes turned to them. Giving a warning glare, she turned her attention back to Naruto. You were moaning in your sleep and sweating. I came to try and wake you and you know. She gestured with her hand, scowling as both of them remembered the way he had reacted when she tried to wake him in Black River, only this time she was rewarded with a headbutt. Naruto I smiled at her red face. Sorry Kurenai-chan. He offered sincerely. She scowled but her red cheeks betrayed her expression as she waved off his apology. Composing herself, she ran a hand through her hair before clearing her throat. So, she started. Mind explaining what caused Team 7, plus Pakkun such serious injuries and caused you of all people to suffer from chakra exhaustion? This disbelief in her voice was evident with her last few words. When the Yugao had rounded up everyone and told them that Naruto had been checked into Konoha's General Hospital for chakra exhaustion, everyone had laughed for a good 5 minutes. When Yugao didn't even so much as blink, they immediately sobered up. Seeing she was completely serious, they quickly made their way to the hospital. They had tried to be discreet, but seeing so much highly recognized Jonin heading to the hospital had the gossipers talking. News had spread through the village like wildfire that the Yellow Fawn had suffered injuries of some sort, and there was quickly a village-wide panic as the most powerful shinobi in Konoha was injured. Kurenai resisted the urge to roll her eyes. People always overreacted for nothing. Their worry wasn't even sincere, they were just afraid that something could drive the village's most powerful shinobi to exhaustion. Rumors were flying, people were panicking, losing their minds, and it took a village announcement that Naruto was fine for things to calm down. So here they all were wondering just what or who had exhausted Naruto to the point he needed to be treated for chakra exhaustion. Naruto just glanced around searching for 3 young faces. "Where's my Genin?" he questioned tightly. Kurenai sighed before she walked closer to him and sat on his hospital bed. Glancing at her, Naruto could see she was in her civvies, filling out a lovely red dress that accentuated her form with an opened ivory midriff cardigan. Glancing around, mostly everyone was in civvies save for some occasional uniforms. Naruto glanced down at his attire, seeing he was in his familiar black face mask tank top. He felt he was wearing pants underneath his covers. The first Hokage's necklace stood at the center of attention. Kurenai ignored it, stretching forward to smoothen out his slick blonde locks. Satisfied they were decent, she peered at him closely. "No need to worry, your kids are fine. Sakura was in the worst condition, but the doctors say she'll only need a few weeks to recover." She put a hand over his mouth, seeing he was about to speak. "Pakkun is fine. He's at the vet with Hana taking care of him." She removed her hand, momentarily smiling when Naruto sagged with relief. Her smile fell from her face and she adopted a serious expression, crossing her arms. "Now, mind telling us what happened?" Everyone suddenly forgot about the term personal space and a lot of eyes stared at him closely. Naruto's Sharingan took in the faces. Guy, Asuma, Kurenai, Enko, Ginma, Yugao, Heiate, Aoba, Reidu, Ginma, Ebisu, Kotetsu and Izumo, Tenzu, a few unknown faces, and was that Ibiki? Naruto stared at the tall figure in the back, waving dumbly. "Yo, teach." Ibiki just grinned unknowingly, causing Naruto's spine to tingle. That guy should never smile. Ever. He nervously ran a hand through his hair. Damn, the whole gang was all here. Everyone had assembled because they heard he was injured. Not used to being the center of attention, Naruto's cheeks colored under his mask. Enko stared at him before she squealed. "Oh, look everybody. Naruto-chan is blushing." She suddenly tugged at his masked cheeks. "Kawaii. Naruto-chan, if you weren't injured I would just jump in that bad and alright." Kurenai slapped a hand over her mouth and pushed Enko back with a scowl. Rubbing at his cheeks, Naruto let a smile come under his mask before his face became blank. "Naruto-kun." All eyes turned to Yugao. "Sorry to interrupt, but neither me or my squad found any traces of Riha. Wasn't she with you?" she questioned. At the mention of her name, Naruto's eyes narrowed and everyone became tense at his expression. "Did something happen to Riha-chan, my rival?" Guy questioned. Naruto glanced out the window, momentarily watching as Konoha's lights twinkled under the night sky. The village looked beautiful at night. He sighed before he returned his attention to the group. Riha was responsible for this." Everyone immediately became alarmed and questions were rapidly fired. "What? Riha-chan did this? The babe? She wouldn't hurt a fly." Everyone stopped as they were hit with killing intent. Naruto's form briefly glowed with a blue outline and his chakra began to rapidly spike, causing those close to him to step back as lighting crackled around his form. Kurenai remained where she was and laid a calming hand on his leg, meeting his furious eyes unflinchingly. Naruto's gaze softened and his chakra levels lowered. Everyone in the room let out a breath as the suffocating pressure that had been in the air dissipated. Exhaling deeply, Naruto took a calming breath as he lowered his head. "She did this. She nearly killed my students and Pakkun." Yugao immediately walked outside, and the guards at the door stood at attention. "If anyone approaches they are to be terminated with extreme prejudice. I want these doors sealed shut with soundproof seals." The guard saluted and Yugao walked back into the room as the doors were sealed behind her. Naruto kept his head down, his long bangs shadowing his face. "She was a root spy, a seductress sent by Danzo to get impregnated by me." Everyone gasped at the news. That sweet woman was a spy. Yugao had her eyes wide open before she cursed out loud, startling everyone. "That slut! I knew her name sounded familiar." Her tearful eyes turned to Naruto. "Kami, Naruto-kun, I'm so sorry. I could have done something, she trailed off as tears fell down her face. Hayate wrapped an arm around her, whispering to her ears in comfort. Naruto raised his head to glance at Yugao. It's not your fault. She had everyone fooled. Not even my dog sensed any bad intentions from her until it was too late. Everyone was stone-faced. For a spy to fool them all for so long was serious. Eyes met and a wordless message passed between everyone. If even Naruto was being spied on, what's not to say they weren't as well? Who could they trust in this village now? Why does Danzo want your genes? Asuma questioned. He resisted the urge to pull out a cigarette to try and calm his nerves. Naruto seemed to sag at the question before he ran a hand through his hair. He wasn't sure how Asuma would react if he told him his father was responsible for all this. I don't know if you all can handle what I'm about to tell you. He met each eye in the room. You're all loyal to Konoha and serve the Hokage. I wouldn't want you to feel conflicted because we're friends. Your lives could be in great danger and if I was responsible. He trailed off sighing. You could all be killed. I couldn't allow you all to take this risk. Asuma scratched his beard. So I'm guessing the rumors of beef between you and the old man are true, eh? The tall man suddenly grinned. Well, I hope you hit him as hard as they say you did. All eyes in the room turned to him and Asuma shrugged. What? Naruto shook his head. Listen, I know you all made time out of your busy schedules to visit me, and I'm touched, but I think you all should leave. I could never ask any of you to be involved with what I have planned. For a bastard like me you shouldn't suffer. Naruto grabbed his head in pain. Beside him, Kurenai retracted her hand frowning. Naruto, I don't think you understand how much we care. He stared at her red eyes seeing nothing but complete seriousness. He slowly shook his head at her disbelief. Before he could speak Asuma interrupted. I said it before, and I'll say it again Naruto. You're more of a Hokage than the old man could ever be. I can't speak for everyone here, but I can say for myself that I was never loyal to this village. That's why I briefly joined the 12 Ninja Guardians. My loyalty lies with my comrades. If there's someone I look up to, that person would be you, Hokage-sama. He grinned. Naruto shook his head in frustration. You don't understand, none of you understand. If you only knew. He trailed off sighing to himself. Kurenai resisted the urge to thump him on his head. Why was Naruto's head so thick? Naruto-kun. She started resting a hand on his leg. You can trust us. Please don't push us away. She pleaded staring into his eyes. Naruto glanced at her before he acquiesced with a grunt. Naruto wordlessly gestured for her to come closer. Knowing what he wanted to do, she shifted closer resting a hand on top of his head and holding up a hand seal. Using her genjutsu prowess the whole room shifted and distorted. The shinobi in the room allowed Kurenai's chakra to invade their minds and they were suddenly viewing Naruto's memories. Please don't start a riot when this is finished. His voice was disembodied coming from all around them as his memories were played to them like they were front row in a movie theater. He showed them the events from the very beginning. What had happened in Black River with Konohamaru, to the revelation of the Hokage's dark secrets, to the root agent stalking him and finally the events that happened with Riha. When his memories finished the genjutsu ended and everyone found themselves back in the hospital room. Gazes were wide and mouths were open. Yugao broke down to tears and even Enko had to sit down to compose herself. Ibiki remained stone-faced but his eyes held a threatening glare. Guy's eyes were threatening to spill with tears. How could the Hokage do this? Such vile acts, unforgivable. He shouted standing looking ready kill. Asuma was worst off, taking to grinding his teeth together looking ready to murder. That son of a bitch. He's gone too far. He stood like Guy. Naruto, what you're planning, I want in. He demanded. Kurenai held herself well, swallowing thickly, blinking back her threatening tears. She turned to Naruto who was watching all of them quietly before the blonde slowly shook his head. See, this is what I meant. I can't in good consciousness ask any of you to get involved. Today was the last straw. I'm doing this alone. He whispered. Guy's eyes narrowed down at him as he snarled. Then what, Naruto? If you succeed you'll be hunted to the ends of the earth. He shouted. I can't, I won't lose my best friend. My rival. His voice cracked remembering the day Kakashi died, as the tears finally spilled. He'd be damned if he lost Naruto. Aoba laid a calming hand on his shoulder for support. Naruto shook his head. I'm sorry, but I won't allow. Damn it, Kurenai, stop hitting me. The woman had her fist clenched before she lowered her arm. Forget thick-headedness, Naruto was an idiot. She roughly grabbed him by his long bangs, ignoring the way he hissed. Listen here, Baka. We've all known you since the day Kakashi introduced that small little boy to us 12 years ago. We've watched that young boy grow before our eyes into a man, becoming the most powerful shinobi to ever grace this village. But despite all your power, all your reputation, we had to watch you suffer. And it kills me to know that you held us all back at arm's length, suffering in silence. She stared into his eyes. No more, Naruto. We're going to stand beside you whether you like or not. If you want to be stubborn, then I'm just going to force you into submission, and trust me, you wouldn't want that. She gave him a threatening grin. Naruto stared at her as she loosened her grip before she frowned again at the sight of his locks. She stretched forward again and smoothed them out before lowering her hand when they were decent. That was becoming a habit. Naruto briefly glanced at her before staring around at resolute faces. He swallowed thickly, suddenly feeling a rise of emotions in the pit of his stomach, and his stubborn walls refused to fall. After Riha, he didn't think he could trust Aga. She hurt you, didn't she? Kurenai said quietly. She stared at his tense form before she stretched her hand forward and intertwined their fingers. Naruto, we won't ever hurt you. We're your friends, trust us. She pleaded sincerely. Naruto refused to give in. I do trust you all, honestly I do. But Riha just proved that. You loved her. Naruto froze, his wide eyes staring into Kurenai's tearful gaze. And she took advantage of that. Despite him controlling what they saw, she had felt everything that he was experiencing because of her genjutsu. His pain, his suffering, and worst of all, his broken heart. Don't allow what she did make you lose your faith in people, Naruto. If you can no longer place your trust in Konoha, place your trust in us. The people who love you. She squeezed his hand warmly. Please. She was practically begging as her eyes misted. Naruto felt his threatening emotions boiling over and his eyes filled with tears. Naruto. At the mention of his name, he looked into the eyes of Genma. Beside him stood Reidu and Iwashi, the Hokage guard platoon that had served his father. If there was one man I and my colleagues respected more than anything, it was your father. Before his death, he tasked us to protect what was more precious to him than anything in this world. He sighed. By your life, I failed him, we all failed him. I couldn't fulfill the request that my dead Hokage gave me. But I can start now. Naruto watched in shock as the trio kneeled before him. Please, I beg you, don't deny us the honor to protect and serve the son of the man I loved like a father. Naruto was speechless. Jigenma. He trailed off as guys saluted him before kneeling. Asuma gave him a mock bow before kneeling as well. Even Enko kneeled, grinning at his face. He gasped as one by one, everyone slowly kneeled before him. He stared at their bowed heads and he felt those stinging tears finally start to fall. Why? Why were they all so fiercely loyal to him? What had he ever done to deserve such dedication? Guy smiled at him, his eyes shining. My eternal rival, I'll follow you to the ends of the earth. He spoke without a hint of doubt. Asuma was grinning as he looked at him, a cigarette lit in his mouth. You already know where my loyalty lies. Faces nodding in agreement. By your word, Naruto. Naruto-senpai. Naruto-sama. Tenzu grinned. Everyone nodded at the term. Naruto-sama. They chorused together. Naruto finally broke down hearing their declaration of loyalty to him. Never in his life have expected such dedication from the people he had come to call friends. Kurenai smiled softly at him where she sat, before she tugged on his hand, pulling him into a warm embrace. She guided his head to his shoulder and lightly ran her hand through his blonde locks, whispering soothingly into his ear. As he cried, she remembered Riha's words to Naruto. The Jonin didn't show it, but those words cut deeper than any knife and it had hurt him badly. But he wasn't alone, he was never alone. He just was bad at expressing his emotions. His self-isolation had made him alien to social contact. She wrapped her arms tighter around his shaking form. How devastating it must have been, to have the one person he thought he could trust betray him. The way he had handled her, in her humble opinion, wasn't violent enough. Bitch! She internally mused. I hope you burn in hell. She rubbed small circles into his back and kissed the top of his head lightly. Ibiki had stayed quiet through the whole exchange, not one to mingle or show emotion. He favored to stand back and watch as everyone crowded around Naruto, whispering words of comfort. He nodded with pride as he watched him get comforted through the love of his peers. He always knew that boy was special. Konoha was rotten to the core. He had seen the shadows that had darkened it for years with his own eyes. Those elders had long since passed their time, mingling in affairs and plotting behind the backs of the military. It was time for a change. A new Konoha, one that wasn't subjected to the hypocrisy or sentiments of the will of fire, a false ideology that had brainwashed most of Konoha's hard-working shinobi to their deaths. He shook his head at the thought. Naruto would be the changing wind to extinguish these controlling flames. The revolution that would bring about change, with all the force of an unstoppable hurricane. And those elders' days were numbered, that he was certain. He grinned at the thought. When this brat becomes Hokage, he hoped that he would remember the one who taught him everything he knows. Danzo glanced down at his unconscious agent, her body beaten and broken, paralyzed by the cursed seal he had placed on her. Her form was bloody, missing an arm bearing many lacerations and visible broken bones. Even her eyes were melted shut. But despite all that, she was still alive. He wordlessly turned to some of the soldiers around him and gestured for them to carry the girl. She had obviously been a failure. He was just thankful that his cursed seal had activated before she could speak any of his secrets. As the root agents moved to touch her, she began to stir awake. Her head twitched and she began to moan in warning, but it was too late. As soon as one of the agents touched her, black markings appeared on her body. Danzo gasped as 4 symbols solidified on her form before releasing from her body, branching out in a wide arc, and an inky black substance began to spray the area. Get back! Don't allow any of that substance to touch you. It was too late. Agents in the nearby vicinity had the black substance land on their form as the seals expanded into the air. Before they could run, a large back spear formed under the seals before it collapsed in on itself, sealing everyone and everything caught in it into the woman's body. Danzo had jumped back in time, narrowly escaping with some agents. His breathing was hard as he hadn't had to move so fast in quite a while. A large crater had formed in the area, leaving the land forever scarred. Danzo sked, scowling at the notion of falling for a trap that nearly being killed. To put a reverse 4 symbols seal on a person while they were alive was even beyond his prowess. An ugly scowl formed. That damn boy. Retrieve her body, he said tightly. He turned on his heel to limp away, but one of his agents called his name lightly. Danzo turned, addressing the agent with a scowl. What? The agent pointed to the crater. My lord, you need to see this. His brow furrowed, but he wordlessly limped closer and peered into the crater. His lone eye widened at what he saw. Riha was still alive. But she was groaning in extreme pain. Whatever she was being subjected to had nullified his cursed seal, as the woman was moaning loudly and holding her one arm over her stomach. This shouldn't be possible. For all purpose she should have been dead, but then again he had never seen the seal activated on someone while they were still alive. She screamed in agony and her stomach began to contort and shift. A tremor ran through her body and her form started to rapidly expand. Danzo didn't have time to cover his face as the woman exploded, showering everywhere with blood and guts. He used his robe to wipe his face before he froze at the sight that greeted him. Pieces of bone and flesh were everywhere. What even looked like a piece of her head had landed not too far from the crater. It was truly a disgusting sight, and no doubt her last moments must have been extremely painful. But what had caught his attention was the bloody message written in on the ground. You're next, Danzo sneered before he began to limp away. Destroy an evidence of this ever taking place, I want nothing left. Inside Konohagakura's Hokage Tower, the third Hokage was watching the transpiring events through his crystal ball. He had been alarmed when the seal he had placed on his double agent began to pulse, alerting him that her life was in danger. Never would he think that she would be discovered so soon. His plans had failed spectacularly. As he watched Danzo walk away from the message written in blood, he sighed. It wouldn't be soon now before Naruto came for him. He turned his attention to his guards. Make haste and get the elders. The guards hesitated. My lord, Hiruzen just sighed. Do as I ask. As the guards bowed and disappeared, the Hokage picked up his pipe. With a focus of fire chakra, the pipe was lit. Taking deep puffs, Hiruzen sighed deeply, leaning back into his chair. He didn't have to wait long as his two teammates came through his office door looking quite unhappy. As usual, Koharu was the first to state her displeasure. What is the meaning of this, Hiruzen? To summon us at such an hour? Shut up and sit down. He whispered, gesturing them to the chairs in front of his desk. They frowned, but both did as requested. Hiruzen still sat back in his chair, taking a few puffs before he turned his chair around and stood, walking to his office windows, to peer out at Konoha's beauty at night. Both elders shared a glance before Hamura cleared his throat. Hiruzen, why have we been? Konoha is beautiful at night, is it not? Hiruzen interrupted. They stared at his back in confusion, shaking their heads. What was this old monkey rambling about? Koharu sat up in her chair, giving Hiruzen a wary glance. Yes, it is, but Konoha's beauty is of no importance right now. What is important is the REA. In your final moments, you start to appreciate the things that you have. He interrupted again. It's the little things, the subtleties that you never really think twice about, that start to stand out. Wouldn't you agree? Both elders had no idea where this conversation was going. Fed up with him avoiding their questions, Koharu frowned at his back. What on earth is going on, Hiruzen? He puffed on his pipe a few times, sighing before he turned around and faced them with a serious gaze. Naruto will soon come for us. Both their eyes widened at the startling news. How does he know? Koharu whispered in fear. Hiruzen shook his head, and she nearly sagged with relief. But their old teammates wasn't finished as sat in his chair, sighing again. But I fear he will soon find out. Hamura grinded his teeth together. You see now why you should have just killed him, Hiruzen. But no, you were too soft, too weak, not having the guts to do what was necessary, and now he has grown strong, a threat to us all. Koharu willed him to calm down. Hamura, please be calm. Hiruzen is the Hokage, surely he can't, she gasped as Hamura turned angry eyes to her. Are you a fool? Have you felt that boy's chakra? I've only felt such ominous and potent chakra in one man, and that had been when Mito-sama was trying to control the beast sealed inside of her. Koharu gasped. Surely you must be overestimating him, she said with fear. She had heard rumors but had dismissed them as hero worship, seeing them as nothing more than just that. Rumors. Hamura would have slapped her across the face. Has old age dulled your mind? He shouted in exasperation. Koharu, he killed a jinchuriki by himself when he was only 16. 16. He shouted, and he shows more skill using the same chains as Mito and Kushina to control and suppress the chakra of a tailed beast. Who else do you know could accomplish such a feat? He bellowed, grabbing her by her shoulders. Hamura. Hearing the warning tone in the Hokage's voice caused Hamura to release his grip and sit back into his chair. Hiruzen watched the man compose himself before he turned his attention to a shaking Koharu. I fear Hamura is right. Naruto is powerful, very powerful. And now that he has the Mangekyo Sharingan, I don't even think in my prime I would be able to match him. Koharu gasped and Hamura just shook his head in defeat. It's hopeless, we're all doomed. He sighed. Hiruzen ignored him, favoring to just enjoy the momentary peace while it lasted, puffing on his pipe, allowing the soothing tobacco to ease the tension in his muscles. Koharu looked ready to cry. What will we do, Hiruzen? If even Hiruzen was no match for Naruto, then things were hopeless. He would kill them all. Hamura stayed quiet, focusing his thoughts on running from the village and heading for the capital to seek safety within the Fire Lord's court. Konoha. His whisper caught their attention. Seeing their confusion, he elaborated. Despite Naruto's strength, he cannot stand against the military might of 17,000 shinobi. I would have to be discreet, recalling our shinobi from across the continent. Hamura adopted a serious gaze. What are you implying? Such words held serious ramifications. Hiruzen met his gaze blankly. You can already guess, my old friend. Koharu shrieked, having heard enough. This is madness, Hiruzen. Konoha would be weakened, defenseless, and our enemies wouldn't just stand by and watch. Her form shook with a mixture of fear and rage, and she started stuttering. Why, you see what you have caused. If you had just left. Hiruzen's fist smashed against his desk, shattering it. His crystal ball fell to the floor, shattering to pieces. I did what I thought was best. Konoha was weakened and we needed all the help we could get. Her lip quivered before the tears started to spill. Not that, you fool. Why did you have to kill her? Why? Now we're suffering for the actions you have caused. He swore revenge, and now he will soon have it. She broke down, resting her head into her hands. Hiruzen grimaced before he fell silent. I had no choice. He whispered, turning his chair to hide his look of shame. I had no choice. The chairs emptied and he heard Hamura lead the crying woman out of his office, her whimpers fading, leaving him in silence. Hiruzen sighed, taking the hat off his head before he stood walking to the window and staring out at the village. Everything that he had done, every action that he had taken, was for the greater good of Konoha. As Hokage, he was tasked with the protection and perseverance of this village, and he would be damned if. Crack! Hiruzen jumped before he turned, walking around his desk and staring down at the portrait that had fallen off the wall. He stared at it for a few moments before he bent down to pick it up. He flipped it over and his eyes widened. Minato Namikaze stared back at him. Hiruzen features shifted into fear before he dropped the portrait and backed away from it, shaking. And no. Leave me alone. Leave me alone. He screamed to the empty office. These omens had haunted him since that day, following him wherever he went. He had felt it, like someone was watching him, eyes following his every movement. Sleepless nights had plagued him and he found himself paranoid, shouting at something that wasn't there. Even in death, that man continued to torment him. Curse you. You'll pay for this. Before death, I swear it. You will pay. Hiruzen grabbed his head in pain. Linger in fear, for the belly of the Shinigami hungers for your soul. He stumbled backwards, leaning on the windows of his office for support. A sudden chill went up his spine and his head hammered almost if it was being squeezed. Run. Hide. Cower behind the walls you so foolishly believe will protect you. He felt that same sensation of eyes watching him, and his eyes fell on the Hokage tower. The fourth Hokage's stone eyes seemed to pin him under their eternal stare. Naruto will come for you. Hiruzen gasped before he ran out of his office. He had to get away from those eyes. Those same cold blue eyes that tormented his sleep. Those same eyes he saw reflected in his son, as if he had been reincarnated to take his vengeance. And I will be waiting. That's it for part 5. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.